It begins in 1861. I have just inherited the throne of the Netherlands. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 176, Prime Minister Bismarck's Accurate Calculation. With the signature of Christian IX confirming the abolition of the London Protocol, this led to tension between Denmark and the German Confederation in the Schleswig and Holstein regions, which was close to war. But Christian IX was not without gain. At this time, a large-scale demonstration broke out outside the Danish royal palace. The Danes supported the annexation of the two regions. This demonstration even made the Copenhagen police chief declare it the safest and most patriotic demonstration in Copenhagen's history. The majority in the parliament had originally prepared that if he did not sign, Christian IX would be removed from the throne by the Danish parliament, and even the candidate was selected to make Swedish King Carl XVI the King of Denmark. At this time, the situation was tense, opinions were sharply opposed, and it even caused the concern of Danish Prime Minister Monrad. After the young Christian IX signed the new decree of the November Constitution, the Prime Minister began to try to appease the anger of the people, but the people were indifferent. He wanted to appease the anger of Germany, but people ignored him. It was still in this situation that he asked to see Christian IX. "Your Majesty, we are in a bad situation." Seeing Christian IX's indifferent look, Monrad's heart sank even more. He smiled bitterly in his heart and said worriedly, "According to our intelligence, the whole of Germany is now aroused by our cancellation of the London Protocol, and a strong wave of nationalism has been aroused. Mass rallies and demonstrations have been held in various places, demanding strong actions against Denmark. The Germans in the two principalities of Holstein and Schleswig refused to swear allegiance to you, and asked the German Confederation Parliament for help, calling on the Confederation Parliament to recognize the eldest son of Duke Frederick von August as the Duke of the independent Duchy of Schleswig-Holstein. They even claimed that the London Protocol, as your legal inheritance right, was no longer legitimate with your abolition. Duke Augustenberg saw this point and felt that there was something to be done, so he put forward the inheritance claim to the two principalities. Christian IX sat and listened to Monrad's worried words. How could he not be worried too? He said, "How many troops from Hanover and Saxony have entered Holstein now?" Monrad heard this and said, 6,000 each, a total of 12,000. "They intend to test us militarily, Your Majesty." Christian IX waved his hand to stop Monrad's persuasion. He stood up, walked to the map, pointed at Holstein, drew a big circle with a pen, and then drew a big circle in Schleswig in the south. He turned his head and said to Prime Minister Monrad, "The German Confederation has been eyeing these two places for a long time. No matter how we retreat, they will find an excuse. They began to die down after Frederick VI's tacit agreement. Now, it's just an outbreak." Monrad sighed when he heard this. Facing Germany with two major powers, Austria and Prussia, no matter how Denmark struggles, it seems powerless. Christian IX thought the same. So he comforted him, "I hope that the infighting between Austria and Prussia can minimize the damage to Denmark in this crisis." Monrad nodded when he heard this and said, "Your Majesty, I will contact all countries and ask them to put more pressure on the German Confederation." After Monrad disappeared in front of Christian IX murmured, "My son-in-law William IV, your original guess was correct. Prussia is indeed ambitious. Frederick VI and I have made many arrangements. I hope that this crisis in Denmark can be safely resolved." On July 11, 1864, the British government sent a deputy foreign minister on behalf of Viscount Palmerston to visit the Russian Empire, the French Empire, the Kingdom of Sweden, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and obtained the support of the above four countries, and proposed to intervene in the incident, pointing out that the entire issue should be handed over to European countries for resolution. At this time, Austria and Prussia, who had just passed a joint motion in the German Confederation Parliament, said that as long as the 1852 agreement was not invalidated as the basis of the agreement, and the two principalities were only in a personal relationship with Denmark, Austria and Prussia would agree to return to the agreement. So under the auspices of the United Kingdom, the five countries of Britain, France, Russia, Sweden, and the Netherlands and Austria and Prussia of the German Confederation held a meeting at the deputy foreign minister level in London on July 15. However, This meeting only showed the inevitable confusion of the relevant issues, and each country expressed its own opinions and it was difficult to unify. Count Biest of Saxony, who represented the German Confederation, wanted to go to various countries to recognize the sovereignty of Duke Augustsburg over the principality. The people sent by Austria tended to favor the same plan as the 1852 agreement, while Prussia gradually showed its desire to obtain the duchies. Even at the meeting, Prussia expressed its hope that the duchies would be independent and become a single entity. All countries knew Prussia's ambitions. As a member of the German Confederation, Austria had already begun to oppose it before the other countries expressed their opinions. What a joke! Prussia was already strong enough, and Austria was gradually falling behind. Now if the two duchies were independent, it would give Prussia the opportunity to take the two duchies into its pocket. For Austria, it would completely lose its influence in the German Confederation. Although the two countries had privately agreed to allow the duchies to obtain complete political independence and be bound by common institutions, the next step was not yet clear. As for the issue of annexing the duchies, Prussia left it pending, but indicated that any agreement must allow them to militarily dominate Schleswig and Holstein. This worried Austria a lot. Franz Joseph I and Archduke Rainer Ferdinand naturally did not want to make Prussia, which had already overexpanded, even stronger, so they turned to support the declaration of Duke Augustenburg and established an independent duchy that was not under the jurisdiction of Prussia. However, for William I and Bismarck, this matter was already within their calculations. Because long before, they had already told Duke Augustenburg privately without Austria's knowledge that as long as the Duke was willing to obey Prussia completely in military terms, and give the port of Kiel to Prussia as a military port, let the Prussian army control the nearby Kiel Canal, and join the customs union led by Prussia, they would support his declaration at the meeting. Just when Duke Augustenburg was hesitating and wanted to bargain, Austria, which also led the German Confederation, was rumored to be unwilling to join this liberation war, because Austria was unwilling to fight for him, and Austria had no motivation for territorial ambitions, because as rumors had it, Austria had already been exhausted from governing the governance problems brought about by multiple ethnic groups on its own land. This made Duke Augustenburg finally sign the agreement privately and agree to Prussia's conditions. Prime Minister Bismarck in Berlin was very excited as Duke Augustenburg signed the agreement. The Polish Uprising and the Princely Conference were not the only events in the series of patriotic sentiments of the German Confederation this year. Both events were overshadowed by the two long-standing problems of Schleswig and Holstein. As these two problems fermented, Bismarck's foreign policy was influenced by this problem even to the smallest means. Bismarck saw this key point, so he cleverly used it to consolidate Prussia's position in northern Germany and his power in Berlin politics. Even before he became prime minister, when he was still a minister of state, he was planning to find a top-down way to plan the model opportunity of unifying the German Confederation in this event. Therefore, he planned Duke Augustenburg, a strong competitor for the position of Danish King of Christian IX, to create trouble and provoke dissatisfaction among the Germans. It caused conflicts between the Danes and the Germans. At the same time, in order to instigate Christian IX's participation in the Danish-German War in 1852, which caused the Germans in Schleswig and Holstein to oppose his rule, Prussia took the opportunity to introduce the candidate who had always been friendly to Germany, Duke Augustenburg. This eventually persuaded Austria to participate in this event, because Austria was also a signatory after the First Schleswig War. Bismarck took advantage of Austria's multi-ethnic characteristics. It was unwilling to support the German Confederation's racist tendencies on the issue of the two duchies, and was worried that Germany would lose its prestige. This dilemma made Austria lose the diplomatic initiative on the issue of the two duchies, and Bismarck saw this point and replaced it. Bismarck had a personal experience of the Schleswig and Holstein issue, because as early as 1855 to 1858, when he served as Prussian minister to France, he had a fierce debate with a Danish representative in France in Paris. At that time, he had advised the Prussian government to make it clear that it would express its opinions in the name of the glory of the German nation, but not to take action against Denmark, as long as Prussia gained obvious benefits in solving this problem. However, Bismarck's approach was warned by Britain at that time, and Britain demanded that Prussia must respect the London Protocol. The Prussian government was afraid of the dissatisfaction of the Austrian government at the time and the international status of Britain, so he finally compromised. A loss makes a wise man. However, Bismarck started from then on, and he developed skillful self-control, learned to act in accordance with international law, cited the role of the parties, and relied on the London Protocol to prevent other countries from interfering in this issue. He did not use the flag of the German nation Zwei, but opposed Denmark's annexation of Schleswig in the name of maintaining the London Protocol of 1852. This stance appears conservative and seems to maintain the European order and uphold international law, but in fact it is conducive to openly resisting interference from countries such as Britain, France and Tsarist Russia. It also helps to incorporate Austria, which has always feared and opposed national movements and tried to maintain the existing order in Europe, into the policy framework planned by Prussia. Chapter 177, De advances, Den retreats. Therefore, when many radical people in Germany advocated that Prussia abolish the London Protocol of 1852 and take back the two duchies, Bismarck just declared in the Prussian parliament that he would never participate in such violations of international obligations. After that, Bismarck proposed a motion in the German Confederation Parliament and finally passed the agreement. Seeing this, Austria, in order to avoid losing the hearts of the people within the German Confederation, finally fell into Bismarck's trap and could only reach an agreement to jointly send troops to occupy Holstein. After half a month of confrontation between the 12,000 troops of Hanover in Saxony and Denmark in Holstein, as the German Confederation formally passed the agreement, Austria and Prussia each sent more than 20,000 troops, and other duchies also participated. An army of more than 60,000 people headed for Holstein on July 28. In order to clearly prove that Denmark did not want to hold on to this member state of the German Confederation. As he announced before, he was willing to give up Holstein. He ordered the Danish army to retreat northward to the border between Schleswig and. On July 23, 1864, the joint army of the German Confederation completely occupied Holstein. Constrained by the abolition of the London Protocol by Christian IX of Denmark, it was difficult for countries to find excuses to interfere with the actions of the German Confederation, so they could only continue to wait and see. But even if there is no excuse, countries have to stand up and express their opinions. I hope Denmark and the German Confederation can be spared from war, otherwise it will be a disaster for Europe. Although Tsarist Russia is now in a weak period after the Crimean War, their statement still has great power. The German Confederation Parliament even asked the army in Holstein not to advance to Schleswig. As they predicted, Britain, the troublemaker of the entire European continent, also stood up. The interests of the British Empire in the Baltic Sea must be protected by all countries. We will not tolerate the infringement of British interests. Therefore, Britain will send a navy to cruise in the Baltic Sea. Sweden, as a member of the Kalmar Union with Denmark before, naturally did not want to see Denmark being bullied. When accepting the parliament, Karl XV said, "We ask all parties to calm down and think about how to resolve the current conflicts. Force cannot solve all problems." Sweden supports Christian IX to succeed the Danish throne. But unfortunately, Karl XV had just finished speaking. Unexpectedly, a few days later, the Swedish parliament chose to overturn Karl XV's draft requiring Sweden to prepare to send troops to support Denmark, which made Karl XV and Denmark very disappointed. But seeing the reason for the parliament's veto, it was very helpless. Because they have a reason and a basis. The reason is that the situation has developed into this under the London Protocol signed by Sweden, which has nothing to do with the nature of the Danish-Swedish covenant, but Sweden's participation in the dispute lacked righteousness. As the Swedish parliament's rejection of Karl XV's draft supporting Denmark was exposed internationally, the international community was shocked, but there was no way to blame the Swedish parliament. Because it was indeed Denmark that violated the agreement first. Therefore, although the Danish government expressed disappointment, there was no follow-up. The Dutch government said, "We do not want to see a war in Central Europe, because war means death and heavy economic and military losses for all countries." Denmark is a close partner of the Netherlands, Prussia is a close ally of the Netherlands, the German Confederation is a friendly neighbor of the Netherlands, and even the Duchy of Luxembourg in the Netherlands is a member of the German Confederation. The Netherlands is neutral in its position and does not support either side. The Netherlands is willing to provide a place for peace talks and contribute to the negotiations between the two sides. With the statements of various countries, the German Confederation coalition slowed down its pace. Austria even issued an order to suspend its advance. Vienna was in an unfavorable situation at this time. It not only maintained a weak connection with Prussia, but the Hungarians were very opposed to Austria's participation in the Danish War. They firmly opposed Austria's expansion of its influence in the German Confederation, especially the military actions taken by Austria. Hungarian political giant Georg Ferenc warned, "Their war is not our war." Hungary even opposed Franz Joseph I's idea of Hungary sending troops, which further reduced Austria's influence within the German Confederation. Archduke Rainer Ferdinand and Joseph I even suspected that this was the work of the Prussians, but Austria did not want to add another enemy to the German Confederation, so Austria could only pretend not to hear Hungary's complaints in order to save face. It can be seen that there is also a hidden crisis within Germany. Bismarck's handling of the Duke of Augustenburg was only a private matter. On the surface, he pretended not to mention the issue of the Duke of Augustenburg's succession and proposed that the two duchies should be freed from Denmark and returned to Germany. In solving this problem, as the Austrian and Prussian troops entered Holstein, he privately told the Austrian ambassador to Berlin that Prussia excluded Hanover and Saxony and the German Confederation Parliament, and promised that Prussia and Austria should carry out the task of controlling the two duchies. He told the ambassador that Prussia and Austria could form an offensive and defensive alliance within the German Confederation, rebuking some people who said that Berlin wanted to take over the two duchies and turn them into two Prussian provinces. He also assured the Austrian ambassador that this was not the case and firmly rejected the possibility of this issue happening in Prussia. As the possibility of war between Denmark and the German Confederation became increasingly high, William IV convened a four-member meeting. The four people include William IV, Prime Minister Thorbecke, Chief of the Military General Staff Mark Rutte and Foreign Minister Hubert von. What the German Confederation did to Denmark today may very likely be what it does to us in the Netherlands tomorrow, Mark Rutte said worriedly. The German Confederation is too powerful. If it were a whole, I believe that Britain, Tsarist Russia and even France would have to form an alliance to deal with them together. So they won't allow this to happen, Prime Minister Thorbecke said. Germany seems strong now, but in fact it is strong on the outside but weak on the inside. It's just a show. Hubert von also said, yes, they are fighting fiercely now. In the North German Confederation alone, Hanover follows Prussia economically, but politically and militarily, Hanover has close relations with Britain, and the same is true for Bavaria in the south and Austria. However, Prussia seems to have planned very carefully with the rise of Bismarck, so that now Austria can no longer suppress the rise of Prussia. Your Majesty, I am worried that Prussia's leading action this time will turn its head to us in the future. Chapter 178 The Threat from Powerful Prussia. Will the Netherlands face the same situation as Denmark in the future? As Hubert von expressed his concerns, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Thorbecke, and the Chief of the Dutch General Staff, Mark Rutte, showed unprecedented solemnity on their faces. The Duchy of Luxembourg, like Holstein, is also a member of the German Confederation and a private principality of the King of the Netherlands. Holstein can be used as an excuse for the infiltration of the German Confederation, so is the Duchy of Luxembourg in the Kingdom of the Netherlands the same? This is a problem that the Netherlands must face. William IV saw the expressions of several people, and it was obvious that Hubert von had indeed hit the nail on the head on this issue. Moreover, William IV also knew the ambitions of the Prussians. At present, Luxembourg was far away from Prussia in the north, but how could the world know that from 1864 to 1871, a few years later, in just 7 years, Prussia relied on defeating Denmark, while consuming Austria's military strength, defeating Austria, driving Austria away and unifying Germany, and France, establishing land hegemony in Western and Central Europe and becoming the German Empire, to complete the three wars of the empire's advancement. A unified Prussia leading a unified German Empire is more threatening to the Netherlands. Therefore, this is why the Netherlands wants to rise in the same way and must get rid of the German threat. This is why he wants to bring the main force of the Netherlands to develop in the Far East. Ask William IV, why not defeat Prussia and replace it before Prussia rises now? William IV never thought of this idea. Why? Because the rise of Prussia has its own cause and effect. Britain, France, and Tsarist Russia all need a strong Prussia. Because of the alliance between Tsarist Russia and Prussia for hundreds of years, when Austria had a dispute with Tsarist Russia, Austria had to take into account the alliance between Prussia and Tsarist Russia. The same is true for Britain and France. At the same time, when the three countries faced the powerful German Confederation, they naturally did not want to confront each other. What could be more effective and easier than resolving them internally? Finally, An ambitious Prussia that was neutral among the powerful countries was obviously much more useful to Britain, France and Russia when they were on guard against each other than Austria, which only practiced Tai Chi and talked about diplomacy every day. To put it bluntly, compared with a smooth and experienced Austrian society, Prussia, who was still a newly rising and upstart in the eyes of various countries, was more impulsive and easier to control. Therefore, Prussia was supported by various countries all the way. Didn't you see that Tsarist Russia and Prussia had married for several generations, and now Britain also married the next generation of Prussian kings? Even France turned a blind eye to Prussia's successive annexations of the Rhine province and watched the infighting between Prussia and Austria. The Netherlands is currently too small in Europe, and its population and area are difficult to compare with other countries, so its value has been reduced a lot. Britain is on the other side of the Netherlands at sea, so it is very concerned about the Netherlands' maritime power. Although France is currently an ally of the Netherlands and has agreed to form a tripartite alliance between France, Prussia and the Netherlands, the competition between the two countries on the issue of Belgium has not decreased much. With the return of the 3 southern provinces of Belgium to France, the return of the 2 northern provinces to the Netherlands, and the division of 1 province with Prussia, the previous balance in Belgium's population and area has been broken. The Dutch population in Belgium has increased from 60% to 75%, and the provinces with a majority of Dutch people have become 3 to 2 in the Netherlands and France. The Netherlands has an absolute advantage, and even the current Belgian King Leopold II has changed his attitude towards the Netherlands, because with the Dutch-born Jules Darnton becoming the elected Prime Minister of Belgium, Joseph Beit, who is also of Dutch descent, has controlled the Belgian House of Representatives. The strong position of the Netherlands in Belgium can even be compared with a Belgian royal family, and even subtly suppress Leopold II. Therefore, in terms of diplomacy, Belgium now, apart from not hurting the special relationship between the royal families of England and Belgium, Leopold II will almost follow the Netherlands to form the Dutch-Belgian alliance. This has already made France dissatisfied. This can be seen from the fact that the Netherlands has not received obvious support from France on African issues in recent times. Although it is lamented that no matter whether it is the East or the West, in the face of national interests, the Covenant seems to serve the national interests at the time to decide whether to use it. Just like Italy in later generations kept jumping positions in World War I and World War II. William IV had so many thoughts, but in fact, they were completed in an instant. Haven't we already made countermeasures for the threat of the German Confederation? The 3 of them were stunned, and then they thought of something. The 3 of them couldn't help but ask at the same time, is it the Far East? William IV nodded, the depth of the Netherlands is only this big, no matter how to defend it, it is useless. When facing the powerful German Confederation, on this European continent, only Britain can cross the Atlantic Ocean and Russia can use the big to deal with it. Hesbert von, Your Majesty, why don't you mention France? William IV asked Mark Rudd, if the German Confederation attacks France, can it be defeated? Mark Rudd, according to past history, France is too strong, but just like what Prince Frederick Karl of Prussia, who fought in Africa, said before after observing the French military training, the French control began to decay. At the very least, the French army may be about the same strength as Austria, but when facing Prussia, there has begun to be a gap. This is from the comparison of wars in African countries. I believe everyone has read the latest issue of the Amsterdam Peace Research Institute, which publishes the comprehensive strength and military strength of various countries. This latest issue has been reduced to single-soldier combat. France is not Prussia's opponent. The Amsterdam Peace Institute was founded in Luxembourg. It is a semi-annual publication about the military strength of Europe and the world in the first and second half of each year, published in January and July. It has become an authoritative publication in Europe, just like the European Times, which is also in Luxembourg. In this regard, it is many times more famous than the British Financial Times and the Times in later generations. At least at present, the upper class in London, England, is subscribing to the Luxembourg European Times and the Amsterdam Peace Institute while subscribing to their 2 local newspapers. In this regard, even Britain has to admit the fairness and authority of the European Times and the Amsterdam Peace Institute. France is in danger. Compared with Britain and Russia, France's depth is still a little small. At this time, Hesbert von also thought so. With the guidance of William IV, the ministers in front of them instantly established the strategic importance of the Far East to the Netherlands, and also provided administrative urgency and speed for the Netherlands to build the Far East more quickly in the future. This is what William IV wanted. Anyone who underestimates Prussia will suffer a great loss. You must be careful of Bismarck. He is not a simple man, especially in the role he played in the German Confederation's action against Denmark this time. Mark Rudd asked puzzledly, "Your Majesty, I don't understand why Prussia, when it is so powerful, can defeat Denmark by itself, and still unite with Austria." Thorbecke and Gijsbert van were full of doubts. William IV. Bismarck decided to cooperate with Austria. The reason for doing so is fourfold. First, to cover up the ultimate goal of annexing Holstein and Schleswig. Britain, France and other countries are opposed to Prussia's annexation of the two duchies. The British Empire does not want the control of the North Sea and the Baltic Sea coast to fall into the hands of a country more powerful than Denmark. The French Empire is also unwilling to see Prussia continue to expand. Austria is more afraid of the new strength of its competitors. Therefore, the joint action between Prussia and Austria is still a more reliable guarantee to prevent Prussia from swallowing up the two duchies in the eyes of Britain, France, Austria and other countries. Seeing that several people nodded in agreement with this statement, William IV continued, "On the second hand, the joint action between Prussia and Austria will not only help prevent the possible joint intervention of Britain and France in the implementation of the plans of Bismarck, William I and others, but also resolve Austria's obstruction and prevent the recurrence of the Olmütz Agreement in 1850, which forced Prussia to abandon its plan to unify Germany due to pressure from Austria and Tsarist Russia. On the third hand, cooperating with Austria and incorporating it into the Prussian policy designed by Bismarck will enable Prussia to control any future actions of Germany, even if Prussia ambitiously agrees to the idea of a German confederation and has the initiative when it is implemented." These words shocked several people. They were all shocked by the grand plan of the Prussian cabinet led by Bismarck, and looked at William IV in disbelief. Unify Germany? What a crazy ambition this is. But why, after listening to the analysis of His Majesty William IV, did they feel that this ideal was no longer unrealistic for Prussia led by Bismarck, but instead increased their confidence in their successful realization? This is exactly the position that surprised them. Even they are like this. So when the members of the Prussian cabinet face Bismarck directly, will they support Bismarck's actions more? Thinking of this, several people's faces turned worse, because this means that the support for the Prussian cabinet in implementing the unification of Germany is definitely not low. Combined with the actions taken by Bismarck's cabinet now, they even guessed that the plan has begun. Then, the Dutch government led by several people will face such an ambitious Prussia in the future. How can they feel at ease? Therefore, the faces of several people are extremely solemn. William IV. Fourth, Bismarck's cooperation with Austria is a stopgap measure. Its fundamental purpose is to use the problems of the two principalities to gradually dilute Austria's influence and damage Austria's image. It even lays the groundwork for expelling Austria from Germany in the future. Expel Austria. Almost an exclamation. This was said by Gijsbert van. He also realized his own gaffe, but the other people were not much better at this moment. Because William IV's words were too shocking. Yes, an Austria that is slowly no longer recognized by Germany, an Austria whose image is no longer in line with that of a leader, an Austria whose multi-ethnic group cannot manage its own country, an Austria that is inferior to Prussia militarily and economically. Do you think everyone still wants such an Austria that is occupying a lot of space? Chapter 179, The Vienna Cabinet is located in Berlin? 1864. The German Confederation had more than 80,000 troops in this operation. Except for 20,000 troops left in the rear of Holstein for supplies, the other 60,000 troops all pressed towards the border between Holstein and Schleswig. They had a dangerous face-to-face confrontation with the Danish army on the opposite side. Danish Prime Minister Monrad said that it was unacceptable for the German Confederation to launch an attack on Schleswig after occupying Holstein, and Denmark would not allow such a thing to happen. The Prime Minister also claimed that the German Confederation's action this time was an act of trampling on the sovereignty of international countries and an act of intimidation to other countries, and said that Denmark would not accept such unwarranted intimidation. The European Times reported that Prime Minister Monrad issued this statement to the media at various countries in the form of a press conference on the morning of August 5 to respond to this matter. He said, "This is an act of intimidation, an unwarranted and unfounded act of intimidation. The great kingdom of Denmark will never accept this kind of intimidation. Denmark's foreign minister Mek also said that the occurrence of this incident shows the German Confederation's hegemony and ambition for other countries' territories. He hopes that international countries can stop the German Confederation's aggression against other countries and bring peace to the European continent. Danish Defense Minister Das told the outside world that the German Confederation has now completely occupied the Duchy of Holstein, which in itself has exceeded the power of the German Confederation. Now it is no longer disguised and chooses to directly attack Schleswig, Denmark. This is a radical act. He said that Denmark has more than 30,000 troops stationed in Schleswig. As Denmark faces the greatest danger in history, people from all over Denmark have risen up bravely. Everyone is actively signing up to participate in the action of defending their country. A large number of troops will be added to the Schleswig front. We swear to defend Denmark to the death. As the most important members of the Danish cabinet came out to express their views one after another, it was clear that the confrontation in Schleswig had turned into a dangerous situation. At the same time, the British fleet in the Baltic Sea also began to patrol, near the Prussian ports of Nykøbing and Copenhagen, and the British kept stopping for supplies, which put pressure on the German Confederation. Austria, in the Vienna Palace. Franz Joseph I met with the Austrian Prime Minister Archduke Rainer Ferdinand and Foreign Minister Reisberg in the State Office. Your Majesty, now that we have joined this joint action, Prussia has become much more obedient. Archduke Rainer Ferdinand said. However, it seems that Berlin's intentions are becoming more and more difficult to figure out. I don't know what Bismarck is up to. He is so kind to propose a joint action to us. This was impossible in the past. It's a bit weird. Bismarck proposed that Prussia and Austria cooperate very much in Austria's opinion. On the one hand, Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I, Foreign Minister Reisberg and Prime Minister Archduke Rainer Ferdinand could not ignore the excitement of the German people, and on the other hand, they did not want Prussia to seize the leadership of Germany. For Austria, the biggest worry is that if the Schleswig-Holstein issue is resolved by Prussia, Prussia will become the new leader of the German Confederation. This is unacceptable to Austria, and Austria must do everything possible to stop it. Now Bismarck's proposal is exactly what Austria wants, so it will succeed as soon as they hit it off. Austrian Foreign Minister Reisberg said at this time, Prussia has just sent a telegram, declaring that it does not intend to support Augustenburg, because they only require the status of the two principalities based on national self-determination. Archduke Rainer Ferdinand sneered, they are harboring evil intentions. What do you mean? Franz Joseph I asked. Your Majesty, have you forgotten the current domestic situation in Austria? Joseph I and Reisberg's faces changed. Because the Austrian Empire is a multi-ethnic country, each nation is now fighting for greater rights, especially the second largest nation, the Hungarians, who are now almost on an equal footing with the Austrians. If this kind of national self-determination is allowed, or even supported by Austria, then it can be imagined that the major ethnic groups in Austria will use this as an excuse to ask Austria to give them more rights, which will be a catastrophic event for Joseph I and the Austrian government, who are already dissatisfied with the current situation. Therefore, out of principle and position, several people firmly opposed this kind of national self-determination. On July 28, 1864, at the Vienna Parliament meeting, Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I, while discussing the status of Schleswig-Holstein, immediately rejected Prussia's proposal for national self-determination. Prussian Prime Minister Bismarck firmly opposed the meeting and did not attend it. However, just when all countries thought that the two countries would fall out and Denmark's actions would be affected, Prussia proposed on August 10 that Prussia and Austria jointly intervene in the status of the two duchies, so Austrian Emperor Joseph I and others were very happy. A meeting between the two countries was held in Frankfurt on July 30, 1864, and a secret agreement was reached. When Foreign Minister Reisberg found out that Bismarck and Ob had criticized Duke Augustenburg, he was relieved because they obviously felt that Prussia had stopped playing tricks. Even afterwards, the Austrian diplomatic leader never acted so meekly in accordance with the policies of the Prussian politicians. Even many Prussians were puzzled. Since the Baden incident, the two countries could not cooperate anymore. At least in the eyes of the Prussians, the Hohenzollerns and the Habsburgs would never cooperate again. It had only been more than a year, but now Bismarck suggested that Prussia and Austria jointly maintain the German Confederation. People felt humiliated by the decision, and the old Prussian conservatives who had always believed that Bismarck was in their Holy Alliance were excited that Bismarck's transformation led to the reconciliation between Prussia and Austria. William IV and his Privy Council members watched all this happen. Few people in Prussia realized that Bismarck, the Prime Minister of Prussia, has completely grasped the initiative in diplomacy. Many people may guess that the statement of Vienna was mainly driven by Austria. In fact, what they don't know is that this is just the will of Berlin. Austria fell into the trap designed by Berlin without knowing it. Foreign Minister Chancellor Van Hall sighed. William IV smiled slightly. People may think that the Cabinet of Vienna is located in William Street in Berlin. Chapter 180: The calculations of various countries in passively supporting Denmark. In short, Austria's purpose of joining the war was to oppose Prussia's annexation of Schleswig and Holstein alone. This intention was no secret in Europe. The British support at sea, which made many Danes happy, was just a lot of noise but little action. Britain obviously did not want to offend the German Confederation. This also made Christian IX and the Danish government feel a crisis. On August 1, 1864, Danish Prime Minister Monrad once again reminded the countries that were not members of the German Confederation that if they could not support Denmark in getting rid of the threat of the German Confederation, it would have devastating consequences on the strategies and interests of the countries on the European continent. According to the interview in the European Times, Monrad said to the European Times after a security meeting on the German-Danish war in Copenhagen that day, "If Denmark is threatened and invaded while other countries turn a blind eye, the echoes of this impact will be felt all over the world. Europe and the world will hear these echoes, including London, Paris, St. Petersburg, Moscow, and even the far east of America. If people believe that acts of aggression are rewarded, that strength is right, and that the large number of troops formed by Prussia and Austria to invade Denmark on the border of Denmark are correct, then the future development of the situation in Europe will definitely not be seen by even God, because that is a dark moment. I do not understand the intentions of William I and Joseph I, but now there are worrying signs." As Monrad's interview was released, various countries questioned whether the German Confederation's entry into Holstein and stationing troops on the border of Schleswig was legal. Although Denmark itself violated the agreement first, as the Danish Prime Minister said, the threat of the German Confederation will have a spillover effect, threatening the security of European countries. Although Prussia successfully formed an alliance with Austria, it had already begun to work with European countries. Therefore, Denmark still hoped to gain support from European countries like the First Schleswig War. However, this time, except for the British lieutenant who sent a navy to make a move to show its presence, other countries let Denmark know that they might not be so lucky this time. French Empire, Paris. How far has the joint army formed by the German Confederation reached now? Napoleon III checked the recent political affairs in various parts of France. This was his usual behavior. Every week, the Prime Minister of the French Empire, Olivier, would bring the document signed by the King to Napoleon III for confirmation. As the two talked, they talked about the most watched German-Danish war in Europe. "Olivier, we have reached Schleswig. I heard that Prussia suggested that the German Confederation may attack the small town of Lübeck in the east of Schleswig in the next 2 days. Napoleon III took his eyes off the document when he heard it. He raised his head and glanced at Olivier. After a moment, he lowered his head and continued to check, but said, "It seems that Prussia has surpassed Austria." Olivier smiled bitterly and said, "There is no way. Prussia is obviously stronger and stronger now. Austria has begun to lag behind Prussia both economically and militarily. The members of the North German Customs Union are expanding in the German Confederation and have even gradually infiltrated to the south. Austria has chosen a truce in the Austro-Prussian economic war." Olivier was stunned when he heard it, then he quickly understood what he meant. He nodded and said, "Yes, the cabinet government of Archduke Rainer Ferdinand has obviously compromised temporarily. It wants to prevent Prussia from seizing the lead in the foreign affairs of the German Confederation alone and win the hearts of the member countries." Napoleon III put down the document and sighed, "What a pity, such a good opportunity, but we are stuck in the quagmire in America." Olivier also showed reluctance and regret when he heard this. France was stuck in the quagmire of the Mexican War at this time, and was scheming with Austria in northern Italy, so the French Empire was also in crisis. Because of this situation, Napoleon III had no time to take care of the dispute on the Jutland Peninsula, and hoped to get compensation from the German Confederation and give France a blood transfusion as the price for France's tacit consent to the free actions taken by the German Confederation led by Prussia. In fact, 2 months ago, Bismarck had hinted to the French ambassador stationed in Berlin that Prussia was willing to discuss the issues of Schleswig and Holstein at a meeting chaired by Napoleon III, and proposed that it might cede an area on the left bank of the Rhine to France, which was friendly to Prussia, in the near future. Napoleon III was naturally tempted by this. He didn't have to send troops to Denmark to fight to the death, and he could get territory. Naturally, Napoleon III didn't think about it for long, and he was ready to stop supporting Denmark's interests in the two places. In exchange for his interests in other regions, when Danish Prime Minister Monrad called on all countries to support Denmark and prevent the invasion of the German Confederation, Napoleon II's foreign minister Fleury made it clear that France had no intention of military intervention. Tsarist Russian Empire, St. Petersburg. Alexander II also looked at the telegram for help sent by Denmark with a distressed face, and was very distressed. Since he inherited the throne in 1855, he has carried out a lot of reforms, focusing on military, social, judicial and administrative systems. In the social field, he has increased investment in education and healthcare. Since 1863, the universities of Tsarist Russia have gained autonomy, and the academic atmosphere has gradually liberalized. Like other European countries, with the full implementation of universal secondary education in the Netherlands in 1862, in 1863, major countries such as Britain, France, Prussia and Austria promulgated and joined the national constitution one by one. So his signature came into effect, and starting from the second half of 1864, the secondary education institutions of the Russian Empire also began to accept students from all walks of life, changing the previous practice of only accepting children of nobles. Even St. Petersburg has just opened the first batch of girls' middle schools in the Russian Empire, and women have also obtained the right to receive higher education and medical education, which makes the status of women in the Russian Empire higher than other European countries in society, which has won him a lot of support at home. However, the Russian Empire has encountered difficulties in recent diplomacy, which makes him very dissatisfied and helpless. After the end of the Crimean War in 1855, the Russian Empire fell out with Britain, France, Austria and other countries, and was in a diplomatic isolation situation, and the domestic economy was almost collapsed. It was under such circumstances that Alexander II came to power. He faced the worsening of the livelihoods of people from all over the country due to economic difficulties, and the country began to accumulate dissatisfaction with the Romanov royal family. Although he later suppressed this crisis, diplomacy became more and more difficult to display, and he finally used Gorchakov to alleviate it. However, the Polish uprising against the Russian Empire in 1863 was a headache for Alexander II. Because Britain, France and other countries, out of political considerations, expressed their sympathy for the Polish insurgents under the banner of humanitarianism, Alexander II was very troubled by this. It was under such circumstances that Prussia actually aimed at this opportunity, and took advantage of the Polish uprising in 1863 to make a deal with the Russian Empire. When Britain and France supported Poland and isolated Russia among the great powers, Bismarck, the Prussian prime minister, sent people to St. Petersburg to sign an agreement to help Russia suppress the Polish uprising, in exchange for Prussia's leading a neutral stance in the dispute and even war with Denmark that was about to break out this year. Good Bismarck, he is indeed the most trusted and capable subordinate of William I of Prussia, and he is indeed very powerful. Alexander II envied it. If we, the Russian Empire, did not support Prussia, it would be possible for Prussia to join the anti-Russian group, which would be a huge diplomatic disaster for Russia. So the Russian Empire readily agreed to Prussia's request. Even after France was obviously wooed by Prussia and expressed its support for Prussia, even a week ago, the Russian Foreign Minister Gorchakov immediately defended France's position and strongly advised the Danish government not to resist in the situation in Holstein and Schleswig. But compared to the Russian Empire, the former rival of the Russian Empire, Karl XVI, must be very distressed now. Yes, the Swedish King Karl XVI is very uncomfortable now. Since the Napoleonic Wars, Sweden has shown Europe that Sweden pursues a neutral policy after 1815 and will not send troops at will. But the First Schleswig War, 1848–1851, was an exception, because Scandinavianism was prevalent in Northern Europe at that time, so Sweden sent 15,000 soldiers to defend Denmark, which affected the relationship between the two countries. Even at the Swedish-Danish meeting held in Scarsburg last month, Charles XV promised to ensure that at least 20,000 Swedish-Norwegian soldiers would be sent to Schleswig to defend the southernmost outpost of Scandinavia. However, this promise was rejected by the Swedish parliament just last week. Charles XV was even very annoyed to find that a group of liberals led by Swedish Finance Minister Johan Grippenstedt rejected Charles XV's promise at the Swedish-Norwegian joint intergovernmental meeting held at Ulista Palace. These guys said at the meeting that only when Britain and France intervened in the Schleswig and Holstein issues could a decision be made, but Britain and France did not intervene, and Tsarist Russia even stood on the side of Prussia. Although Sweden was willing to support Denmark, it was surrounded by Prussia and Tsarist Russia on both ends of the eastern and southern Baltic Sea, and its own weakening strength made it dare not move. So finally last week, Charles XV chose to compromise and gave up supporting Denmark. Chapter 181 Civilian Volunteers from Sweden. In the face of the Swedish parliament's proposal to oppose supporting Denmark, although King Carl XV of Sweden finally chose to compromise and give up supporting Denmark. However, this was only possible on the surface, but privately, the people of Sweden and Norway still enthusiastically assisted Denmark. Even with the acquiescence of Carl XV and the parliament's turning a blind eye, the people of Sweden and Norway formed a volunteer army on their own, with more than 3,000 people arriving in Copenhagen and being welcomed by the Danish people. This is also the reason why Denmark did not let it go when the Swedish parliament refused to send troops to support Denmark. Sweden implements a dual-head cabinet system, and has established two cabinet giants, the Prime Minister of Justice and the Prime Minister of Foreign Affairs. The current Prime Minister of Justice is Old Louis de Geer and Prime Minister of Foreign Affairs Ladvig, but today, the Norwegian Prime Minister George Sibern also appeared in front of Carl XV. Everyone has seen the situation in Denmark. Prussia's careful design is very clever, so that all countries choose to treat Denmark's request for help passively, including us Sweden. What do you think we need to do to support Denmark? Carl XV is also a member of the Scandinavian nationalist movement, so he had a friendly relationship with Frederick Witte, who was much older than him. The two even had many rounds of negotiations in private, trying to form a new team similar to the Kalmar Union for Sweden and Denmark. In order to cope with the increasingly complex environment in Europe, in order to protect themselves and maintain their own interests. But he didn't expect Frederick Witte to leave so quickly, and he originally wanted to continue this policy with the new King Christian IX, but before he started, the German Confederation came to the door. This made Carl XV very helpless. He originally wanted to gain the favor of the new king in the name of support, but the veto of the Swedish parliament cut off Carl XV's idea, which almost made Denmark turn against him. Fortunately, he had made military and civilian support actions before, so that civilian actions were not restricted, so that the two countries could continue to maintain friendly relations. However, the relationship has naturally regressed a lot. As these Swedish governments joined in discussing the situation in Denmark, Carl XV's face not only did not show joy, but his face became darker and darker as he analyzed. Finally, he smiled bitterly and said, "It seems that the situation Denmark is facing is not optimistic. British Empire, London. Schleswig is not part of the German Confederation. The invasion of the German army there will be an act of war against Denmark. In my opinion, this will make Denmark entitled to our active military support, but without the authorization of the British Parliament and the Queen, the British cabinet government led by me cannot announce such a decision." Faced with the German Confederation's threat to Denmark, faced with such a complicated situation, the British Prime Minister Viscount Palmerston announced in a high-profile manner that the British cabinet supported Denmark, but at the same time used the reason that the Parliament and the Queen did not approve it as a shield, making everyone understand that the attitude of the British Empire has gradually become blurred. As we all know, although Queen Victoria of England did not support Prussia, she did not want to intervene in the Schleswig issue by force. She proposed to express sympathy for Denmark. Obviously, her experience of growing up in the Duchy of Saxony in the German Confederation made her still have feelings for the German Confederation. Although the media and public opinion of the British Empire strongly supported Denmark, the idea of sending the English Channel Army to the Baltic Sea for naval intervention soon disappeared, leaving only patrols and guards. Although the Prime Minister of the British Empire, Viscount Palmerston, chose to support Denmark with tough foreign means, he even threatened Prussia and Austria with war, but was countered by Bismarck. In the end, this famous European Prime Minister had to calmly endure this setback. Why? Because at the cabinet meeting just passed, the doves prevailed among the cabinet members. Although Viscount Palmerston had previously issued a long speech in support of Denmark, in the end he could only summon the Danish minister sent by Denmark to ask for help without the support of his cabinet, parliament and the Queen, and had to emphasize to him that Denmark could not think that the British Empire would go to war with the entire German Confederation for its own interests. So far, Denmark's request for help from Britain failed. Netherlands, Amsterdam. It is normal and predictable that the British Empire failed to seek help. When Tsarist Russia suppressed the Polish uprising, the British Empire opposed Tsarist Russia. The change in Russia and France's position has isolated the British Empire. Moreover, within the British Empire, the people actually sympathize with Prussia's efforts to unify the German Confederation. Some British Empire officials believe that Prussia can curb the expansion of Tsarist Russia and France, and they support Prussia. But there are also others who believe that the expansion of Prussia's power in the Baltic Sea threatens the British Empire's maritime hegemony, and these people support Denmark. However, due to the opposition of Queen Victoria and Parliament, they cannot intervene in the matter and have to stay out of the matter and pay attention to the development of the situation. As Husband von analyzed step by step, the positions of various countries in the face of Denmark's request for help were revealed, which made the Privy Council quiet. Obviously, Denmark's request for assistance has failed, Thorbecke said in a deep voice. The countries that intervened in the First Schleswig War, such as Britain, France, Tsarist Russia, and Sweden, could not continue to intervene for various reasons. Bismarck's pre-war diplomatic offensive reassured the European powers, changed the international environment that was unfavorable to Prussia, and won the support of the German nationalism. What surprised me most was that Prussia actually pulled Austria into the group and became a part of Bismarck's design for the change of the situation, and walked into the set trap, thus turning Austria into the last piece of the puzzle in Bismarck's plan, making up for the shortcomings and clearing the obstacles of the plan. Thorbecke looked around at everyone, and then said in amazement, under Bismarck's interlocking, the current international environment is very favorable to Prussia. The situation in which the major powers tested Prussia in the First Schleswig War in 1848 is no longer a problem faced by Bismarck's cabinet. Denmark's hope of seeking external assistance at this time is gradually shattered. As soon as the words fell, the Privy Council could hear a pin drop. Denmark is in crisis, what should the Netherlands do? This is the question that the Dutch Privy Council needs to discuss next. William IV did not speak a word from beginning to end, he just listened. Obviously, the king is also avoiding suspicion. After all, the current Queen Alexandra is the eldest princess of the Kingdom of Denmark. But is it really so? Chapter 182 The Alliance with their own motives. 1864, the Danish government decided to evacuate Holstein and gather troops north of the Ida River. On August 3, 1864, the German Confederation operation began, and the German Confederation crossed the Elbe River and occupied Altona near Hamburg. Under the order issued by the German Confederation, officially declaring war on the Kingdom of Denmark, the Saxon army continued to take the train from Leipzig to Holstein on August 6, 1864. They arrived at the front line and joined the Allied forces in Hanover-Quintero. On August 5, they passed through Holstein and reached the town of Rendsburg on the border of Schleswig-Holstein. For Denmark, the occupation was a relief. Although this order to retreat without a fight lowered the morale of some Danish soldiers, the military disadvantage forced the military to shorten the border that needed to be defended, so the retreat was a very wise act. In addition, since Holstein and Lauenburg were members of the German Confederation, failure to retreat might lead to a serious political crisis in Britain and France, and perhaps even a war. The Danish army could now retreat northward, while the German Confederation coalition troops marched from south to north, with enthusiastic German republics everywhere on the road. Duke Augustenberg, now Derek Vidai, communicated and traveled with the Confederation troops, and he was also warmly welcomed. On August 10, he was awarded the honorary title of Duke of Schleswig-Holstein by representatives of the German Confederation Parliament in Kiel. However, when they arrived here, Austria and Prussia and other members of the German Confederation had differences. The management of the two duchies was entrusted to the two federal commissioners of Saxony and Hanover. The German Confederation Parliament first claimed that this part of the territory belonged to Frederick Vidai, and Frederick Vidai also received the support of the small and medium states of the German Confederation. They obviously began to be dissatisfied with the joint rule of Austria and Prussia in the German land and expressed dissatisfaction and resistance to controlling the entire German Confederation. These countries were not affected by the London Protocol, which had never been approved by them or by the German Confederation. In fact, these states tried to counter the power of Austria and Prussia by forming a new state. It was really a wave of waves. Austria and Prussia had just eased within the German Confederation, and the small countries were dissatisfied with the suppression of the big countries and held small team building, which attracted the interest of various countries in Europe. Especially now that the German Confederation was still attacking Denmark, many people even wanted, especially the Kingdom of Denmark and the Kingdom of Macedonia, to fight among themselves in the German Confederation first, so that Denmark could take the opportunity to resolve this crisis. On August 12, 1864, the German Confederation Parliament rejected the proposal of Austria and Prussia to inherit the occupation of Schleswig, unless the November Constitution was revoked alone. However, under the huge pressure from Austria and Prussia in the Confederation Parliament, especially when the two countries occupied more than half of the total military force, the small countries had to recognize the occupation of Holstein by Austria and Prussia on August 15. On August 18, 1864, Austria and Prussia announced that they would no longer follow the decision of the Confederation Parliament on Schleswig and assembled troops south of the Ida River. Military tensions continued, but no conflict occurred. The Danish army was stationed on the north bank of the Ida River, and the coalition led by the Austrian and Prussian army was on the south bank. On August 22, 1864, Bismarck presented an ultimatum to the Kingdom of Denmark, demanding that Denmark abolish the November Constitution and leave Schleswig within 48 hours, but the time given by Bismarck was too short. Even from an administrative point of view, it was extremely unlikely to revoke it, because it would take a long time to discuss it in Parliament, and public opinion was very important. Christian IX did not have the strength to revoke it if he wanted to. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that Bismarck did not want to give Denmark a chance to revoke it. He hoped for war because he needed war to win prestige. This is the insight of many European history experts into Bismarck's motives when they specifically studied the Schleswig War in the future. He also wanted to test a new Prussian army that had been gradually established without prior parliamentary authorization, which had always been reformed by Prussian Army Minister Rohan. He wanted to prove to the Prussian king and the Prussians how valuable this army was. The Prussian and Austrian armies were now sitting idle on the Elbe River, showing satisfaction and watching the other Germany make a fool of itself in front of the eyes of the whole Europe while seeking a solution. On August 20, Prussia and Austria issued an ultimatum to Denmark to abolish the November Constitution and evacuate Schleswig, but the Kingdom of Denmark rejected it in writing on the evening of August 21. In Copenhagen, Prussian envoy Hermann Baron and Austrian envoy Adolf Felsach met with Danish Speaker and Foreign Minister Karl Christian Meck and issued a final call for the withdrawal of the November Constitution. They concluded that if the single party did not comply with this request, then the two German powers would be obliged to use the means at their disposal to restore the status quo and safeguard the legitimate rights of the Duchy of Schleswig. Although the two envoys of the two countries were not officially recognized, they represented their respective governments in this incident. Now that the mission had failed, they quickly left Copenhagen. Monrad and Christian IX were both helpless. In fact, they wanted to withdraw now, but the foundation was not good, so Denmark actually chose to reject this request. That's why they finally rejected the unreasonable demands of the two countries in writing. After Denmark formally rejected it, the Austrian envoy von Brunner left Copenhagen first, and the Prussian envoy left 2 days later. Bismarck in Berlin realized that the time had come to ensure Austria's cooperation. Therefore, at the beginning of the first anniversary of the new August, Bismarck proposed to Austrian ambassador to Prussia Calloy to formally form an alliance. In Vienna, Austrian Foreign Minister Reisberg was happy to hear the news. He thought that such an alliance would prevent Bismarck from changing his political policy to support Augustenburg. Reisberg suggested that the two countries put it in the covenant that only with the unanimous consent of both parties could the provisions of the London Protocol be abandoned. Such precise regulations did not meet Bismarck's intentions, so Bismarck told the Austrian foreign minister that his past, William I, would never hold the London Protocol, and suggested that the alliance guarantee the following: if a war breaks out over the Schleswig-Holstein issue, the future of the two principalities should only be decided through consultation between Austria and Prussia. Bismarck's strength and Austria's weakness were formed, because Austria finally accepted Bismarck's statement. Austria was moved by the two principalities, because Bismarck's meaning was very clear. We can share these two principalities, but we must not let other countries in the German Confederation get involved. This means that Austria can also share a piece of territory. When this Prussian ideal is passed back to Vienna, Joseph I and Rainer, Archduke Ferdinand was finally willing to accept the Prussian alliance conditions. The alliance was drafted in this form on William Street on the last day of August 1864 and signed the next day on September 1, 1864. In Amsterdam, King William IV of the Netherlands was looking at the intelligence he had just received, which contained news of the alliance between Austria and Prussia. If Schleswig is handed over, then Prussia and Austria will guarantee that no decision on the succession issue will cause any harm to Denmark in any way. The supreme power of Schleswig will be exercised by the Allied forces. A civil administrative commissioner will be established locally. If the power of the King of the Kingdom of Denmark is deprived, then the two countries will not tolerate the intervention of the Danish government or the demonstrations of some people. Unless the Augustenberg family or the National Liberal Party attempts to hold political rallies outside or in the country itself. According to the non-German states, the two countries should remain consistent in dealing with matters related to the German Confederation in Denmark. At the same time, it is proposed to temporarily maintain the status quo of the Principality. Prussia and Austria will issue the following conditions, requiring Denmark to either revoke the November Constitution or hand over Schleswig. If hostilities occur in Schleswig, the existing peace between the German powers and Denmark will end, and the Austrian and Prussian governments reserve the right to determine the future ownership of the Principality only through mutual agreement. In order to reach an agreement, they will make appropriate further agreements when an incident occurs. In any case, unless both parties agree, the veto will not solve the inheritance of the Principality in other forms. If other countries intervene militarily in the dispute between the German Confederation and Denmark, the two countries reserve further agreements. William IV looked at the content of the Austro-Prussian alliance in front of him and showed deep thought. The two countries in history continued to form an alliance, so would Denmark's fate be the same as before? William IV didn't know that if it really continued like that, then Denmark, with a population of less than 2 million, would lose a quarter of its population, or nearly 500,000 casualties, because of this war, just like in the previous life. What can the Netherlands get from it? As for helping Denmark, William IV knew the cruelty of politics. There was no idea that marriage was a family. As long as the Danish royal family did not fall, the effect of marriage would not disappear. The size of the land area would not affect the marriage between the royal families of various countries. Alexandra also understood this, and the royal families of European countries knew that war was okay, but it was fundamental that the royal family did not hurt the harmony. Otherwise, why did William II and Edward VI fight each other even though they were nephews and uncles in their previous lives? Therefore, don't take marriage too seriously. After all, national interests are sometimes so realistic. On September 5, 1864, under the close attention of William IV, Bismarck sent a special envoy to Vienna when he saw that the time was right. Vienna responded to his satisfaction. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183, The Second Schleswig War. If Christian IX did not revoke the national constitution, the Austrian army would support the Prussian army against any army on the side of Augustenberg or against Denmark. The successful mission of the Prussian envoy ensured that the envoy would agree to the joint action of Austria and Prussia when he returned to Berlin to discuss it in the Imperial Conference of William I. The Prussian envoy brought back what Bismarck wanted from Vienna, which was also the answer Prussia needed. On September 7, 1864, Austria and Prussia officially announced their plan to occupy Schleswig, and the embassies of the two countries in Denmark submitted a declaration of war to Denmark. Finally, with the permission of the German Confederation, the Prussian-Austrian coalition crossed the Eider and Eder rivers on September 9, 1864 and launched an attack on the territory of Schleswig controlled by Denmark. Now, war is inevitable. In addition to the coalition forces of Saxony and Hanover, the war between the Austrian-Prussian coalition forces of the German Confederation and Denmark is also imminent. At this time, all European countries except Germany were staring at the Central and Northern European continent. The dark clouds of war there had already made people in other parts of Europe feel strange. We ask Austria and Prussia to calm down. Things should not develop in this direction. British Prime Minister Viscount Palmerston. This is a war that should not happen. We call on Germany and Denmark to sit down and choose peace as the result to negotiate. Swedish Foreign Minister Ludvig. We still need to talk about the twists and turns to know. War is not the only answer. Dutch Prime Minister Thorbecke. There should be no war on the European continent. We are all civilized people. God is watching us. French Prime Minister Olivier. Prussia and Austria are strong. Denmark's understanding has become the biggest comparison between the two warring parties, with a huge disparity in strength. We think it is very stressful for Denmark. Denmark can actually compromise a little. Italian Prime Minister Marco Minghetti. Small countries want to face the pressure of big countries in order to grow. However, Denmark's abolition of the London Protocol is a bit too much. I also call on Denmark to abolish the new constitution and ease the situation. Portuguese Prime Minister Nuno Barreto. They are all our neighbors. In fact, we Tsarist Russia really need a peaceful and stable surrounding environment. We hope that the German Confederation headed by Prussia and Austria can calm down with Denmark, solve the problem peacefully, and give the Baltic Sea a calm sea surface. Tsarist Gorchakov. However, in the face of various statements made by the heads of state, the German Confederation, in addition to making a light statement, continued to do what it should do. On September 12, 1864, the Austro-Prussian coalition began to march towards Schleswig. The initial battle was smooth and the road was flat. But after entering mid-September, just like Hanover in Saxony, due to the Danish retreat to the Dipple fortress, Fredericia fortress and other defensive fortifications, the Austro-Prussian coalition had to face the offensive operations that might require heavy casualties. On September 16, 1864, Europe was paying attention. It turned out that on this day, the Hanover and Saxon coalition faced the largest casualty since entering Schleswig. They suffered heavy losses in Bad Oldesloe, west of Lübeck. Here, the 40,000 Hanseatic coalition troops suffered more than 10,000 casualties in the face of the desperate resistance of the Danes, and the defending Denmark also lost more than 5,000. This forced Saxony and Hanover to stop. The Prussian and Austrian coalition forces won the first battle of the war at a cost of more than 1,500 casualties in the battle to capture the Dibble fortress, which opened a gap in the subsequent progress. On September 17, facing the siege of the Prussian and Austrian coalition forces for several days, the Danish army, which was exhausted, abandoned the Fredericia fortress. So far, the war on land has basically stabilized. However, at sea, the situation has turned around. Denmark has a stronger naval combat power than Prussia and Austria at sea, because Denmark once hoped that the navy could turn the tide of the war. On September 25, the Danish navy, with superior forces, launched an attack on the Prussian and Austrian joint fleet consisting of 5 warships, 3 Austrian and 2 Prussian, in the waters south of Heligoland Island. 2 Austrian warships were hit and caught fire, and eventually sank. 2 Prussian warships and 1 Austrian warship were only slightly damaged after fierce fighting and fled south to the Mediterranean. Fortunately, the Danish fleet was also damaged to varying degrees and was forced to retreat. This was the first battle of the navy. Denmark won back the defeat on land in this naval battle, allowing Christian IX to save the face he lost because of the defeat in the land battle. As the news of the defeat at sea came back, Berlin and Vienna were silent. Obviously, the Prussian navy was in the Baltic Sea and it was difficult for it to appear in the Atlantic, while the Austrian fleet in the Atlantic came from the Mediterranean, which was too far away. Therefore, it was indeed no match for Denmark at sea, so the attack on land began again. However, it was not Prussia and Austria, but the coalition forces of Hanover and Saxony. They were unwilling to be overshadowed by Prussia and Austria, so they launched an attack again, but they won in the end. However, after accounting for nearly 10,000 casualties, they took down Bad Oldesloe, a southern city in the middle of Schleswig. But what made them most sad was that the Danish army then used human wave tactics and kept adding new support troops. In the end, the coalition forces chose to withdraw from the city war after the first week of October, because there were only 5,000 people left, and the rest of them took it back after Denmark paid more than 30,000 soldiers and civilians. The situation in Lübeck was also grim. Denmark began to fight back, and many Danes actively participated in this counterattack and defense. The result was naturally more than 20,000 casualties, which completely drove the coalition forces of Saxony and Hanover out of East Schleswig, and the coalition forces of the German Confederation led by the two countries retreated to Holstein, except for Prussia and Austria. Europe looked at them with a frown. Only less than 5,000 people survived the coalition army, which means that more than 35,000 people were lost. This was accomplished in just about 2 months. Denmark also suffered more than 50,000 casualties, including military and civilian casualties. This is also a very heavy loss for Denmark, which has a population of less than 2 million. More than 4% of the population was lost. Let's talk about the war between Prussia, Austria and Denmark. The result of the war at sea made Berlin and Vienna realize that they were no match for Denmark at sea, so they set their sights on land. Obviously, it was not a strategy to attack the long with the short. Land is the specialty of the two great powers on the continent, Austria and Prussia. So the attack on land became more fierce. The war between the three countries was another multilateral war in Europe after the Crimean War between Tsarist Russia and Britain, France, Ottoman Turkey and other countries from 1853 to 1856. In view of the fact that the expansion of the war would shake the interests of countries including Britain and France, they were afraid of getting into trouble. Finally, Britain took the lead and representatives from other European countries held mediation in Copenhagen, Berlin and Vienna, urging the three warring parties to cease fire as soon as possible. Chapter 184, The Fall of Kiel Harbor. 1864. Under the mediation of Britain, representatives from Prussia, Austria and Denmark sat down for negotiations and began armistice negotiations. Denmark once put forward several lists of compromise policy plans. Since Prussia took the lead and Austria followed, insisting that Denmark must unconditionally give up Schleswig and Holstein, the negotiations ended in failure. In the eastern port of Kiel, the Austro-Prussian coalition forces could not move at all because of the strong Danish navy. Therefore, the Austro-Prussian coalition forces simply left some cavalry for cover, leaving 5,000 of the 35,000 soldiers wandering outside the city of Neumünster, and the remaining 30,000 troops rushed to Itzehoe in the west. In just half a day, the small town of more than 20,000 people and 2,000 Danish soldiers fell under the attack of Danpo, and Denmark died and burned more than 10,000 people. However, the Prussian and Austrian armies were dignified, because in this occupation war, Danish civilians actually participated in the war, and the number was 4 times that of the army. Obviously, Denmark was very dissatisfied with resisting the attack of Austria and Prussia on Denmark, so both countries quickly reported this situation to their respective governments, reminding their respective governments of the rising resistance sentiment in Denmark. On October 15, Heide city in the west of Schleswig fell again. And just like at Itzehoe before, 50,000 Danes were ready to die, and they followed 5,000 Danish troops to resist the attack of the Austro-Prussian coalition forces. However, after learning about the situation, Austria and Prussia added another 30,000 troops, 15,000 each from Austria and Prussia, to reinforce them. Under the attack of nearly 50,000 Austro-Prussian coalition forces, more than 30,000 Danish soldiers and civilians were killed and injured, and the Austro-Prussian coalition forces also paid the price of 5,000 people to capture Heide city. So far, the Austro-Prussian coalition forces have completely occupied the territory south and west of the central part of Schleswig, Heide city Rendsburg. However, the eastern part was afraid that Denmark would be protected by the navy in Kiel port, so it was difficult to launch an attack, fearing that the damage would be too heavy. Therefore, the Prussian and Austrian coalition forces resumed the offensive on October 20. This time, the two countries focused on Kiel in the middle of Schleswig in the southeast of Jutland Peninsula. Kiel port has more than 1 second-level sailing battleship, more than 2 fourth-level sailing battleships, and more than 5 fifth-level and sixth-level sailing battleships. This was the intelligence of Denmark's deployment that OP had gathered. So at the early morning of October 20, when the Danish port of Kiel was still quiet, there was a sudden sound of gunfire from the sea. The Prussian navy sent a navy of the same size to launch a sneak attack. Although the Danish navy was far more experienced than the Prussian navy, the effect of the sneak attack was very obvious. The commanders of the Danish navy panicked, so they were caught off guard. In the end, after the Prussian navy lost several 5th and 6th level battleships, Denmark itself was sunk after the 2nd level battleships were sunk and the 4th level battleships were also lost island. The remaining 5 battleships fled from Kiel in a hurry and headed north to Eckernford. Kiel fell, and so did the entire city. Kiel is a big city, but it is the largest and most important maritime trade city and residential city in Schleswig, where more than 200,000 Danes live. This battle was very big. Denmark deployed more than 30,000 troops in Kiel, almost deploying 1/3 of the Danish standing army here. There are more than 200,000 Danish civilians living here, all of whom are believers in the Danish nation. Therefore, when the Austro-Prussian coalition forces appeared here, the military and civilians launched a fierce resistance. However, under the fierce and bloodthirsty Austro-Prussian coalition forces of nearly 40,000, the 30,000 Danish soldiers suffered more than 20,000 casualties, and more than 50,000 civilians were killed and injured. The Danish navy was defeated by the Prussian navy for the first time. Although this was a sneak attack, who cares whether it was a sneak attack or not? From the war to now, more than 150,000 Danish soldiers and civilians have been killed and injured, especially the army. In addition, the total number of casualties in other cities has reached more than 50,000. Denmark, with an army of 100,000, has suffered nearly half of its casualties. Prussia and Austria thought they only had to deal with the Danish army, but they did not expect that Danish civilians would resist so enthusiastically, so they also lost more than 25,000 people. Among them, Prussia lost more than 11,000 people, while Austria lost 14,000 people. Saxony and Hanover suffered more than 35,000 casualties in Schleswig. In other words, the German Confederation's marching troops this time totaled 70,000, including 40,000 Austro-Prussian troops and 30,000 reinforcements, with 25,000 casualties and 45,000 in Schleswig. Currently, the entire Heide, Rendsburg, Kiel and other central cities of Schleswig are occupied in the south. After the 40,000 Hanoverian, Saxon and other principalities lost 35,000, 5,000 fled the battlefield and withdrew from the war in Schleswig and Holstein. After Kiel was occupied by Austria and Prussia on October 22, the German Confederation sent a total of 110,000 troops, and the entire German Confederation suffered 55,000 casualties, leaving 55,000 Austro-Prussian troops and the Hanoverian and Saxon coalition forces returning to their own homes. The casualty ratio was as high as 50%, which was terrifying. So the German Confederation Parliament quickly held a parliamentary meeting in Vienna. And Copenhagen, led by Christian IX, called on the entire country to pay tribute and mourn for the cause of more than 110,000 casualties. He also made an uncompromising declaration. Christian IX even designated October 22 as a national disaster day, asking the people to remember this day firmly. At the same time, he announced that he would recruit more than 100,000 new soldiers from the society in order to face the invasion of the German Confederation from the Austro-Prussian coalition. As this public Memorial Day progressed, the Danes were half-hearted, and in just 10 days, they completed the registration of 100,000 people. It can be seen that patriotism is really a good excuse for citizens to join the army. Although they were new soldiers, Denmark had regained an army of 150,000 people. Prussia and Austria naturally knew clearly what happened in Denmark, so Prussia once again reinforced 20,000 people to Schleswig, and Austria increased it to 30,000. So far, Austria has more than 50,000 people in Schleswig, and Prussia has 45,000. This made the German Confederation invest more than 160,000 troops in the Second Schleswig War. On October 25, 1864, Austria and Prussia launched another fierce attack, with Rendsburg as the center. In the west, in addition to the 10,000 people who stayed behind for supplies, there were another 10,000 people stationed in the major cities occupied by the 10,000 Prussian troops stationed in the rear. The remaining 30,000 Austrian troops all attacked Eckernford in the east. After leaving 20,000 people, Prussia also dispatched 25,000 people to attack Husum in the west. The two sides agreed to finally meet in Schleswig. Faced with a seemingly unstoppable Second Schleswig War, the international community has made various statements on this, but just like before, the interests of various countries are different, and the position is destined to determine how deep the sincere concern is. The result that Denmark got from the last hope of support from various countries made them discouraged, and they knew from then on that it was better to rely on themselves than on others. Therefore, in the face of international public opinion, Copenhagen was much calmer. However, although the upper-class people such as Christian IX were also like this on the surface, they would not sit idly by. They wanted to communicate with various countries under the stage, intending to stop the Schleswig War again through other countries. Denmark, Copenhagen. What, Your Majesty, means that you are ready to make concessions to other countries for help. As the Prime Minister of Denmark, Monrad has been in and out of the Danish royal palace more times these days than in the past year. He has to go to the Danish royal palace, also known as the Yellow Palace, more than twice a day. He has been summoned to the royal palace again. However, he originally thought that His Majesty Christian IX had summoned him to ask about the war peace on the southern Schleswig front, but just after he sat down and the stool was not warm, Christian IX told him a shocking news. His Majesty is ready to make a wooing and asking for help from the non-German state empire? This made him feel that the tough new king finally compromised in the face of the cold reality. Although it seemed incredible on the surface, Monrad was relieved in his heart. To be honest, his current position as Prime Minister feels too hot. If Denmark is attacked by the Austro-Prussian coalition, he will become a humiliating existence in future history, so he is very resistant to this position. So he actually wanted to stop the war a long time ago. But facing the new king, he did not dare to bring it up. Now Christian IX's softness made him feel relieved. Christian IX faced the Prime Minister he promoted. He was a loyal minister and a new person. So he took out a secret letter. Seeing the doubt in Monrad's eyes, Christian IX said, "This is Alexandra's letter from the Netherlands." Letter? Monrad didn't understand why Christian IX had the leisure to take out the letter from Princess Alexandra, the eldest princess of the Netherlands, at this critical juncture. Suddenly, he thought of William IV, the man who had been dominating Europe in the past year or two. Since the fight between Denmark and the German Confederation, the Netherlands has become low-key. For more than half a year, the Netherlands seems to have never made any statement on the Schleswig War except for the impartial statement of inheritance. This seems very unusual. How could William IV of the Netherlands be so indifferent to such a disaster in Denmark, the family of the Dutch Queen? Is this normal? So with this idea in mind, he quickly took over the family letter from Christian IX. Under the gaze of Christian IX, he opened it with curiosity. Just a greeting? But slowly, he went from surprise to surprise. After reading the first piece of paper, when the content of the second piece of letter paper fell into his eyes, he was completely shocked. He hurriedly raised his head and looked at Christian IX, who sighed, "I think the method that William IV said to Alexandra is good, and I recognize its feasibility." The Danish Prime Minister Monrad immediately thought, His Majesty approved it, so according to the above statement, if it is really successful, it seems that it will really end. Chapter 185 Denmark Strikes Back. 1864, Austria's 30,000 troops rushed to Eckernford, where Austria finally tasted the taste of failure. It turned out that just after the public Memorial Day, when the Danish army and civilians were the most united, Prussia did not launch an attack in Husum first. Obviously, they had already expected such a result. But Austria did not have this scruple, so on the first day of the war, 30,000 people had just started to arrive here, and the Danish army dared to ambush a surprise force and raided them with cavalry. In a hurry, the Danish army in Eckernford sent troops to fight, and finally the Austrian army paid more than 4,000 people before it was able to get rid of the entanglement of the Danish army in the retreat. This made the Prussian army in Husum feel fortunate. However, Austria's retreat does not mean retreat. Because just when the Austrian army on the front line suffered a defeat, the news began to spread like wildfire in Austria and the various countries of the German Confederation, creating the illusion that Austria was not as good as Prussia, and jokingly said that the Austrian Empire was not as good as the Prussian kingdom, and that the imperial hat should be taken off, etc. This made the officials in Vienna furious and even somewhat dissatisfied with the Austrian army on the front line. Franz Joseph I and Archduke Rainer Ferdinand both asked the Austrian army on the front line to hold on, and at the same time to intensify the counterattack and capture Eckernford to restore Austria's imperial prestige. It was under the near force of Vienna that the Vienna army launched an attack when Prussia attacked Husum from the west. This time, the firepower was fully opened. However, it was not known whether Prussia did it on purpose, but did not send the navy to support Austria in the Baltic. The Austrian army in the Atlantic Ocean could not enter the Baltic Sea, because the entire country of Denmark controlled the major straits leading to the Atlantic Ocean and the Baltic Sea, including the Kattegat in Øresund facing Sweden, the Langland Strait and the Great Bell Strait, the Sams Island Strait, etc., which Denmark surrounded itself. In particular, the Kattegat and Øresund in front were guarded by the Danish navy, and the smallest part of the Øresund Strait was less than 4 nautical miles, which was within the artillery fire on the Danish shore. Austria found it sad that it had a world navy that was stronger than Prussia in the top 10, but it could not enter Eckernford to support them. They were resentful about this, because Denmark was repelled again under the cover of the navy, and it was a miserable retreat. 25,000 people left, more than 6,000 bodies, and more than 2,000 wounded soldiers of varying degrees. In just 2 days of offensive war, 8,000 people were killed, and 1/3 of the combat power was lost. The remaining 16,000 people could only stare at Eckernford in a daze. The Prussian army in the west of Austria only paid the price of 500 people in the first round of battle, but it caused huge losses to the Danes in Husum. The specific data is unknown, but it is definitely more than 6,000 soldiers and civilians died. The casualties of the army were guessed in the telegram sent by the Prussian army to Berlin, conservatively more than 2,000 people. The completely different results of the war between the East and the West are exactly in line with the saying that there is no harm without comparison. The gap is too big. Vienna was even more furious, and the Austrian frontline army became the target of ridicule for the Viennese to vent their dissatisfaction. Compared with them, everyone in Berlin was full of pride. Other German confederations were even more because of this. All kinds of strange thoughts, all of which fell into the eyes of Bismarck, who had already calculated it. Lower Austria's defenses, destroy Austria's alliance, ruin Austria's reputation, and damage Austria's combat power. William I looked at Bismarck with a smile on his face and praised, "Now everything is going according to our plan, and Austria is in trouble now." Yes, I think Joseph I is also having a headache now. Moltke also sighed beside him. Army Minister Ron Seiten said, "What should we do next?" Hearing this, several people looked at Prussian Prime Minister Bismarck. Bismarck enjoyed the attention of the highest level power people in these countries, because this was the sense of accomplishment he wanted. He said, "Denmark has started to send representatives to various countries. They have taken action." Bismarck said to several people, "The population of Denmark is less than 2 million. This means that they cannot survive a protracted war. Therefore, although they have resisted us, they have begun to be overwhelmed. It is impossible for all men to fight to the end." Moltke and others nodded in agreement. Thinking about it this way, it is understandable that Denmark sent special envoys to ask for support from various countries at this time. Moltke asked, "Will the countries ignore it this time?" Bismarck shook his head. "I think they have now found out our details and consumed the strength of several of our countries. They should think that they can suspend it." He smiled bitterly and said, "Obviously, they think that our war of attrition can come to an end, especially when Denmark is about to collapse. Britain will not want Austria to accept the Øresund Strait, because that would be a nightmare for them. Alexander I of Tsarist Russia would not agree. Denmark is so large that it is safest for the strait to fall into the hands of Denmark, a country that poses no threat. Tsarist Russian Empire, St. Petersburg. Denmark can be manipulated by other countries, but Prussia or Austria cannot. We will not allow the Øresund and Kattegat to fall into the hands of these two great powers. Therefore, we agree with Denmark and can support them," Alexander I said to Gorkagov. The latter nodded in understanding. Watching him leave, Alexander I murmured, "Denmark actually made such a request, haha, it's a strange idea. Obviously there is a master's guidance." On November 1, 1864, Husum in the west of Schleswig was captured by Prussia. After Denmark lost more than 3,000 soldiers and 5,000 civilians, it retreated to the city of Schleswig. After Austria increased its troops by 20,000 again, Eckernford in the east finally took it after 10 days of fierce fighting, but the price was another 9,000 people. Austria also reached the east of Schleswig on November 5. It formed a regular triangle with Prussia in the west and the city of Schleswig. At this time, a piece of news came out, which surprised all European countries. Even the news from Tsarist Russia made Schleswig stop the war because they had received a suspension order from Berlin and Vienna. Denmark actually chose to marry the Tsarist Russian Empire. This news immediately shocked Europe. Chapter 186, The Danish Trimarriage Shocks the World. 1861, the situation in Schleswig became more tense. Danish Prime Minister Monroe declared that the Prussian and Austrian troops would probably take over the entire Schleswig within a week, and might even attack the Danish mainland. Some Danish officials said that the Prussian and Austrian troops assembled in Schleswig, Denmark, numbered more than 100,000, and these troops were in an attacking state, posing a huge threat to Denmark. On November 5, after the Prussian and Austrian coalition forces replenished their firepower outside the city of Schleswig, the Austrian army launched another attack on the same day. And Prussia also chose to follow in the west. Behind the Danish army was Flensburg, which was the northernmost city in the entire Schleswig. Going north, they entered the Danish mainland, so this battle could be called a back-to-the-water battle. The Danish army was aware of this, and they had the mentality of defending their country. This made them fight more determinedly and resist the invasion of the Austro-Prussian coalition forces. However, it seemed to be in vain. Because the Austro-Prussian coalition was too strong, under the coordination of the two countries, the first round of heavy artillery sieges used by the two countries caused heavy losses to the Danish army. With 5,000 casualties in Prussia and about 8,000 casualties in Austria, Schleswig fell. Denmark lost more than 15,000 troops, and more than 40,000 civilian casualties. With the fall of Schleswig, the Danish-controlled city of Schleswig only had Flensburg in the north near Denmark and the small town of Nibir in the west. In the west, off the coast, the Austrian Navy and the Danish Navy began a sea battle. As the only main force of the Austrian Navy, the Austrian Mediterranean fleet began to move north from the Mediterranean at the beginning of the war, but the defeat in the previous naval battle caused Austria to suffer heavy losses. But Austria would naturally not give up the role of the navy at sea. So after the defeat, the Austrian Ministry of Defense sent another navy to the Bihe, which consisted of a fleet of 8 sailing battleships, including a first-class sailing battleship and 2 second-class sailing battleships. On November 4, it arrived at Cuxhaven, Kingdom of Hanover, in the German Bay. After the correction on the 6th, it went north and faced the Danish navy assembled in the archipelago in the western sea of Schleswig. Regardless of the land war at that time, the two countries did not want to have a direct conflict of war. Austria did not want its navy, which did not have an advantage in the number of armaments, to suffer heavy losses because it faced the Danish mainland alone. After all, the Prussian navy was still trapped in the Baltic Sea. This fleet is almost half the strength of the Austrian navy. If it is damaged, it will be a nightmare for the Austrian naval power. Especially when Prussia looked like an ally but was actually a competitor, Prime Minister Rainer urged the navy to preserve its strength before coming. Denmark did not want the Danish navy to lose this advantage in the face of the Austro-Prussian coalition because of this battle, so it was very cautious. But then again, if they could guarantee that the result of sending troops would be in their favor, then both sides would certainly be willing to launch an attack. However, the rationality of the two navies was no longer maintained with the fall of Schleswig. On November 10, the Austrian Navy raided the South Island beach under the jurisdiction of Denmark, and then copied the model to capture Pelvorm Island. The Danish Navy, which reacted, was naturally unwilling to have its territory robbed. So the Danish Navy's Southern Atlantic Navy went south and engaged in a naval artillery battle with Austria outside Pelvorm Island. But Denmark was reckless this time. It turned out that after taking the South Island beach and Pelvorm Island, the Austrian Navy quickly deployed heavy artillery, and then lured the Danish Navy into the range of the land artillery. So Denmark lost 2 5-6 and sailing battleships in a sudden and rain of artillery fire, and then withdrew from the range of the shells. Austria naturally took advantage of the victory to pursue, and they were unwilling to let the tiger go back to the mountain. But what the Austrian Navy did not expect was that the Danish sailing battleships were so powerful that they could quickly stabilize the situation under such circumstances. When facing the Austrian attack, they began to maintain their formation and face the Austrian Navy. Therefore, the progress of the German Bay did not develop according to the Austrian plan. Fortunately, the Danish army did not launch a snatch war. It seems that the Austrian Navy has taken the South Island beach and Pelvorm Island. But Denmark has strengthened its own shore defense and fleet patrols on the North Island beach, Amrum Island and the northern island of Futter Island. With the occupation of Schleswig City, Denmark knew that it would be disadvantageous to fight again. The Danish King Christian IX, who was at the center of the Schleswig war crisis and the excuse for the German Confederation to enter Holstein and Schleswig, had lost his earlier superficial confidence as the Austro-Prussian coalition finally captured Schleswig City. He delivered a newspaper speech in the early hours of November 12, and his personal speeches were published in newspapers across Europe, making an emotional appeal to the people of the German Confederation, asking them to help avoid the outbreak of a further war, because Christian IX claimed to have noticed that Austria seemed to be very interested in Denmark, which was very dangerous. At the same time, he called on the Danes in Schleswig to remain calm. You have no reason to lose sleep over this. We are on our own land. We are not afraid of anyone or anything. We don't give anything to anyone. In the original words of the meeting, including the European Times, behind me you can see the Danish and internationally recognized borders. Despite a series of statements and reactions from the German Confederation, these border statements remain unchanged as long as we remain confident and calm. The support of the people has been very important during this period of war, and for this, I thank everyone. Our people have once again proved that Denmark is smart, wise and united. After everything that happened, our people remained calm and responded calmly and thoughtfully in an adult manner. You have no reason to lose sleep over this. We convened a meeting of the Danish National Security and Defense Council. Denmark believes that the latest actions of the German Confederation are an offense to our Danish sovereignty and territorial integrity. All the responsibilities and consequences of this decision are related to the decision made by the senior political leaders of the German Confederation. They recognize that Schleswig and Holstein belonged to Denmark, but now they intended to deprive Denmark of its rights and wage war for the puppets they supported to come to power and become their power. This means that they actually intended to withdraw from the London Protocol and ignore this framework. It was just that they forced Denmark to that critical point in advance to seize the moral carelessness. I know this. I know Prime Minister Bismarck and Archduke Rainer Ferdinand very well, and I have a clear understanding of William I and Joseph I. The decision of the German Confederation headed by the two countries to invade Holstein and Schleswig undermined the efforts for peace, caused heavy losses to all parties, and undermined the previous negotiation format and solution. After that, everyone saw that after Christian IX criticized the entire German Confederation, he changed his tone to call on the people under the members of the German Confederation to remember the many years of exchanges and cultural exchanges between Denmark and the German Confederation and avoid another war. He said that he had tried to invite William I and Joseph I to hold the Three-Kingdom meeting in Copenhagen, and even sent several telegrams for this purpose, but all of them fell into the sea, and all the results were silence, no response, so he appealed directly to the Germans. Christian IX said that the newspapers of the German countries may be strictly controlled, so they may not see his words, but he emphasized that Denmark and the German Confederation actually have no resentment except Schleswig and Holstein, and Denmark has no intention of being a member of the German Confederation. Christian IX also made an emotional appeal to the German people. Many of you have been to Denmark, many of you have traveled in Copenhagen or have your own relatives in southern Denmark, and some of you are still studying at university in Denmark. You know Denmark. He called for, listen to your own voice, listen to the voice of reason. Facing the fact that Austria and Prussia have just captured the city of Schleswig, Christian IX said that Denmark and the Danes will not back down in self-defense. He said, we do not need war, we will not attack, but defend ourselves. You will see our faces, not our backs, yes, our front faces. Christian IX's words are eye-opening. The middle-aged king who inherited the throne of Denmark is currently facing a situation that has made many people in various countries sweat for him. Especially now that they are under pressure from their opponents in Schleswig, the Austrian Empire and Prussia, which is the strongest in the kingdom. When many people were confused about what Christian IX said in this letter to the world, with a series of actions afterwards, people realized that there was a deep meaning. When people from all countries were trying to figure out the words of Christian IX. On November 18, the Danish government held a press conference on the same day. Prime Minister Monrad announced that Tsarist Russia and Denmark would have a marriage between Princess Dagmar, the second daughter of His Majesty Christian IX, and Grand Duke Nicholas Alexandrovich, the Crown Prince of the Russian Empire. Monrad also announced that Crown Prince Frederick of the Kingdom of Denmark would marry Princess Louise, the eldest daughter of King Carl XVI of Sweden. Since Princess Louise is only 14 years old now, the engagement ceremony will be held in 1868 when Princess Louise comes of age. At the same time, Monrad, the Prime Minister of Denmark, also announced that Prince George, the second son of King Christian IX, would be engaged before Christmas this year, and the identity of his marriage partner was surprising. This made people finally feel that this time, Austria and Prussia should stop the attack, because she was. Chapter 187, The Treaty of Gothenburg, the Austro-Prussian Compromise. 1864, Denmark announced 3 major marriages that shocked the world. Denmark unexpectedly announced at the same time that the royal family would marry the Russian Empire, the Kingdom of Sweden and the British Empire. Although Prince George, who is married to the United Kingdom, was only the second son of Christian IX and was not the crown prince, his marriage partner was Princess Helena, the fifth child and third daughter of Queen Victoria. However, the marriage between the two countries at this time was enough to prove the attitude of the United Kingdom, that is, the United Kingdom had obviously made up its mind to protect the Kingdom of Denmark from the invasion of the German Confederation. Similarly, Sweden and Tsarist Russia had the same idea. Obviously, the joint actions of Austria and Prussia shocked and alerted the major powers. If the Baltic Sea outlet fell into the hands of the two countries, it would be disastrous for other countries. Therefore, this collective marriage happened at the same time. William IV even jokingly teased his wife Alexandra that Denmark, led by Christian IX, was a blessing in disguise. Alexandra also agreed with this, because her father, the king, had been unstable in his position before. Under the frequent provocations of the German Confederation, it seemed that his position had been shaken by the pro-German faction in Denmark, and there was a crisis of wanting to pull him down. Although it was finally overcome, the hidden dangers were not completely eliminated. This was her father's heartache. She looked at William IV and was deeply moved. Because when William IV, the son-in-law, was accused of not helping Denmark resist the invasion of the German Confederation, and even when Denmark insulted and disrespected her husband, William IV was still very graceful and treated her as always, and made frequent moves behind her. Moreover, she had to admit that she had once questioned her husband's attitude towards Denmark and whether it was friendly enough, but with all the things that happened afterwards, she was conquered. Because the idea of this marriage to break the attack of the German Confederation came from her husband William. The suggestion in the family letter was William's idea. Now, with his brothers and sisters marrying the four major powers, including the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the Russian Empire, the Kingdom of Sweden, and the British Empire, who dares to question his father Christian IX's position as king? After all, even these countries are willing to marry, so questioning his status is to question the recognition of these countries? With the formation of the four-country marriage pattern in Denmark, it seems that Austria and Prussia should be quiet, but what specific decision will be made remains to be seen. However, according to Queen Alexandra of the Netherlands, Denmark should no longer worry about being attacked by Austria and Prussia. William IV looked at his wife Queen Alexandra, who smiled at ease again, and said helplessly in his heart, "Actually, I don't want to help Denmark, Alexandra, you think too highly of me, because I just like a piece of land in Denmark." But William IV would naturally not say it. With the news that the Kingdom of Denmark married Britain, Russia, and Sweden, it was finally settled after the three countries confirmed it. Different countries have different ideas. Portugal and Italy were disappointed because Denmark was pro-Dutch, as can be seen from Denmark's statement at the last London conference. The German Confederation headed by Austria and Prussia was too powerful. If Denmark, which was pro-Dutch, could be used to weaken the Austrian and Prussian countries, which posed a huge threat to them, it would be a pie in the sky without paying any price. During this period, as the casualties increased from single digits to hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands, the casualties on both sides eventually reached more than 100,000. This made Italy and Portugal inexplicably excited, and even Emmanuel II couldn't sleep because of excitement. Louis I was worthy of being his son-in-law. He was also excited every day and drank a lot of wine to fall asleep. Now, with the marriage of the Kingdom of Denmark, the dilemma was solved in an instant. This made them unhappy, and they couldn't understand Denmark's operation. They couldn't help but smile bitterly and thought, there is no good show to watch now. Hanover, Saxony and other members of the German Confederation were even more helpless. They only realized now that they had gained nothing after so long, and their relationship with Denmark was ruined. Now Schleswig and Holstein were almost in the hands of Austria and Prussia, which made them envious and fortunate. They couldn't help but want to take the opportunity to ask for benefits in the German Confederation Parliament. Joseph I and Archduke Rainer Ferdinand in Austria were even more stunned. However, neither of them was disappointed, because with a war in Schleswig, Austria now seemed to lack some domestic troops. The war in Ethiopia in the south was still going on, and Denmark in the north was struggling, which made Austria feel exhausted. Therefore, if it ended at this time, it would be a relief for Austria. The two looked at each other and understood that this was the best result for Austria. Joseph I said, "The result is very important. Our interests in Holstein and Schleswig cannot be deprived by Prussia. Therefore, the government must keep a close eye on it. Archduke Ferdinand naturally agreed. Bismarck in Berlin was also surprised to see Denmark. Although he knew that Denmark was operating a rescue operation some time ago, he did not expect that Denmark would use such a strategy to win over other countries. Although he did not know what the price Denmark paid, it was obvious that the price of winning over other countries would not be small. He quickly calculated the gains and losses in his mind, and finally he found bitterly that if they attacked again, the benefits to Prussia would be pitifully small, and they would offend more people. Prussia was even wary of other countries because of this, which would bring more obstacles to their future imperial advancement. Fortunately, now we have finally completed the cohesion of the Germans and weakened the combat power of Austria. This has completed the support plan of me, His Majesty in Walka. It is not a failure. However, Schleswig was not completely taken, which was a bargain for Denmark. The German-Danish War was finally completed, and then it was the Prussian-Austrian War. This is the second step of Prussia's rise. More detailed planning is needed next. On November 25, 1864, with the announcement of the marriage of Denmark, Britain, Tsarist Russia, Sweden and the Netherlands, the four major Danish marriage targets, put pressure on Austria and Prussia in the German Confederation and asked them to stop waging war. Seeing that the established goal of starting a war has almost been achieved, and also because of the fear that expanding the war will trigger intervention from Britain, Russia, Sweden or the Netherlands, Prussia and Austria decided to stop while they were ahead. The two countries knew that it would be disadvantageous to fight again and damage the relationship with these countries, which would be more than worth a loss, so they stopped and started negotiations in Gothenburg, Sweden. 2 days later, on November 27, Denmark, Prussia and Austria signed the Treaty of Gothenburg. Chapter 188 North American Storm Strikes Europe. 1864, Denmark, Prussia and Austria negotiated in Gothenburg, a city in southwestern Sweden. Witnessed by Sweden, Tsarist Russia, Britain, the Netherlands, France and other countries, the Treaty of Gothenburg was signed. In this contract, Denmark declared that it would permanently cede the Jutland Peninsula in the Duchy of Schleswig from west to east, starting from the southern part bounded by Husum and the northern part of Schleswig city, including these two cities, the Duchy of Holstein and Lauenburg to Prussia and Austria. In the Western Sea, South Island Beach and Palworm Island were also ceded to the two countries by Denmark when Prussia and Austria insisted on it. Fortunately, the North Island Beach was defended by Denmark with the support of various countries. However, surprisingly, on the second day after Denmark, Austria and Prussia signed the contract, Denmark signed an island lease contract with Britain, Tsarist Russia, the Netherlands and Sweden respectively. In the contract, Denmark leased the North Beach Island to the French Empire for 50 years for £100,000. France leased Furher for £300,000 for the same 50-year lease. Britain leased Emmeram for 50 years for £300,000. As for the Netherlands, it leased the northern part of Sylt for 50 years for £300,000. As for the south, Sweden also leased it for 50 years for £300,000. As all countries signed this peace treaty in a lease contract, they were recognized by all countries and took effect immediately. Although it seems that Denmark is the one who loses in the end. But think about it, Schleswig was just a self-governing principality before. But now, the city of Schleswig and the area north of Husum will be recognized by all countries as officially joining the Danish territory, just as the Danish negotiators said in the Gothenburg negotiations. In the neutral country Sweden, Denmark will establish a new district there, the Schleswig district. This is an important step for Denmark. From then on, they have completely sorted out the dispute between Schleswig and Holstein between the German Confederation, and let Denmark break away from the conflict with them. This is the biggest gain. The 50-year lease of the islands by Britain, Russia, Sweden, the Netherlands and France, which belonged to Schleswig before, now has become Denmark's with the support of these four countries. Although Denmark will not be able to accept it until 50 years later, the sovereignty is there, and Austria and Prussia can no longer deny it. As they are exposed internationally, countries in Europe and even America are all shocked. Although Denmark is not very satisfied with this result, after experiencing the fierce battle between Denmark and Prussia and Austria, they all understand that it is difficult to achieve more by launching a war. Now this effect is not easy. In the end, they also acquiesced to Christian IX's means of dealing with this war, and then took the position of King of Denmark. Prussia and Austria are also dissatisfied with the results of this war. After all, the part occupied by Denmark is almost one-third of all Schleswig. As for the several large islands off the Atlantic coast of Schleswig, Austria and Prussia only took 2 small islands in the south. Although they were dissatisfied with the islands that they had originally set their sights on being forced to sign and acknowledge that they belonged to Denmark, when they saw the lease contracts that Denmark had leased to various countries, they knew that they had no power to object. After all, that was meat in their mouths for various countries. Austria and Prussia had already taken the biggest benefit. Shouldn't they let the countries have some soup? And they still rented it with money. With the signing of these 2 documents, Europe's international status was reshuffled again. This was the most important post-war negotiation on the European mainland since the Vienna Peace Conference in 1815. It was also the largest multinational war in Europe 10 years after the Crimean War, which was fought by the coalition forces of the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, the French Empire and the Kingdom of Sardinia, changed to the Kingdom of Italy after 1860 by Emmanuel II, in the Crimean Peninsula, the Caucasus, the Balkan Peninsula, the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea, the White Sea, and the Near East from 1853 to 1856. Although the Russian Empire lost 522,000 people in the Crimean War, the total losses of the Ottoman Empire, France, Britain, the Kingdom of Sardinia, and the Greek Legion, which had 96,000 people, 95,000 people, 102,000 people, 18,000 people, and 1,000 people, on the alliance side, seemed incomparable. However, this time, both sides, including Denmark and the German Confederation, lost more than 100,000 people, although it was only one-third of the Crimean War. But you have to know that Crimea is in a remote place in Eastern Europe, while the war between Denmark and the German Confederation is in the heart of Europe, Central and Western Europe, so European countries feel the proximity of the war more. After the Crimean War, the Russian Empire was isolated by European countries, just like France after Napoleon launched the war and was defeated. It took 10 years for the Russian Empire to slowly restore its relations with various countries. However, the Danish-German War was due to the large number of countries participating in the war, the German Confederation, so it would not be resisted and isolated. Denmark, which had just married the Netherlands, Britain, Russia, and Sweden, would not be encouraged. So everyone was surprised to find that as the 2 documents were confirmed by all countries, they seemed to have resumed their previous lives as if there had been no war. However, only William IV knew that this was only on the surface. Privately, it was just the calm before the storm. The German unification plan of Bismarck and William I of the Kingdom of Prussia was actually the first step sold through this war. However, in the distribution of the spoils, Austria and Prussia will face doubts from the countries of the German Confederation, and the disputes between the 2 countries over the uneven distribution will be the next big drama. Although the long-standing dispute over the dominance of the German Confederation was covered up in this war, the result of Austria's losses in this war far exceeded that of Prussia, which made Prussia more respected by all countries in the public opinion within the German Confederation. This will add more friction to the battle for dominance, and even because other countries in Schleswig and Holstein are dissatisfied with Austria-Prussia's distribution, it will further fuel the flames, and the friction between the 2 countries will intensify. It brought the same ethnic allies who fought side by side in the German-Danish War to a crossroads, and finally let them meet again on the battlefield of promoting agreement. William IV said to himself, historically, within 7 years after the Prussian-Danish War, Prussia successively launched wars with Austria and France, and finally kicked Austria out of the German Confederation, allowing Prussia to unify Germany. After that, in 1871, after defeating France, it announced the establishment of the German Empire in Paris. It truly broke the original pattern of great power politics in Europe, and Europe once again had a new empire rising strongly. Since then, the German Empire has begun a nearly 70-year road to becoming a powerful country, which can be called a distinctive counterattack journey of a small country in history. Unfortunately, the wars have left this country scarred and battered, and in return, the surrounding countries have also been ravaged by wars and suffered. However, this is the reality of Europe now and in the next few decades or hundreds of years. Without the protection of force, everything is slaughtered. Only Britain in Europe is isolated overseas, so its homeland is rarely attacked by war. The Netherlands needs a piece of land that is not attacked by war and develops rapidly in order to maintain long-term prosperity. The location of the homeland is destined to be impossible to achieve this goal. Looking around the world, it seems that only the Far East, led by Australia, is the best place for the Netherlands to live. William IV stood up with a gleaming look in his eyes and walked to the side of the large map hanging next to him. The Indian subcontinent, the Bay of Bengal, and Lower Burma, and the western coast of Myanmar in the north of the Indian Ocean have been almost completely occupied by Britain. The Malay Peninsula is under the absolute control of Britain. The northwest of the Indian Ocean is the Ottoman Empire and the Kingdom of Prussia that occupied Somalia. Further south is the Netherlands, which has taken Kenya, Tanzania, North Mozambique and Madagascar Island bounded by the Zambezi River. To the south is the United Kingdom, which occupies South Africa and the Mauritius Islands. To the east is the British Overseas Territory of New Zealand, and to the north is Australia and the East Indies, which are now the Netherlands. In other words, the Indian Ocean is now almost surrounded by the Netherlands in the south and the United Kingdom in the north. William IV looked towards the east of the Indian Ocean, where the signs of the places occupied by the Netherlands were very eye-catching. Looking at the dense and familiar signs of the Dutch territory, William IV felt satisfied and at the same time a sense of crisis. He thought, if the Netherlands occupies so many overseas territories, European countries will not be able to disagree. With the division of African colonies and the subsequent wars, it has been proved that European countries have begun to turn their ambitious eyes from their homeland to overseas. Although the Netherlands is strong, it is still lacking compared with the top powers, which makes the Netherlands passive when facing the greed of various countries. Many islands in the Pacific Ocean were okay before, at least they didn't have much economic value. But they are numerous and widely distributed. If I remember correctly, in the past, European countries paid attention to the Pacific Islands after the division of Africa. The newly rising Prussia and the United States, like wild dogs looking for food everywhere, led the old powers such as Britain and France to drive the occupation of small islands in the Pacific Ocean. And in the 1890s, in just a few years, the Pacific Ocean, including the Hawaiian Islands, was divided up. Now the Netherlands has taken the lead, but without strength, how can they be saved? Didn't you see that without colonies to fight for, the United States deliberately created the main incident next to Cuba in the Caribbean Sea, using this as an excuse to quickly drive away the former empire, the now declining Spanish kingdom, and took away the Philippine Islands in the early 1900s. The mainland can even be temporarily lost, but the Far East is the root of the Netherlands is becoming a great power, and it cannot be lost, William IV said to himself so firmly. At this time, Queen Sandra came in, followed by Prime Minister Thorbecke and Foreign Minister Huspet van. Is there something going on? The two looked excited, and he couldn't judge whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. Thorbecke said, Your Majesty, there are new changes in the war in the United States. President Lincoln in the North has just announced a draft. Under the gaze of William IV, the former said shockingly, in order to deal with the South, his government will announce the liberation of black people. The United States of America will issue the Emancipation Proclamation. The Confederate States of America in the South strongly rebounded against this, and the South launched a stronger attack on the North, almost blooming all over the place the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln finally made his big move. Life was about to get tough for the South. Chapter 189 Two major camps of aid to the United States in South America. On November 30, 1864, Elihu B. Washburn, the new Secretary of the Interior who had just been nominated by Lincoln and approved by Congress on the 10th of the previous month, together with Attorney General James Speed, drafted the Emancipation Proclamation and proposed it to Congress. President Lincoln of the Confederate States of America announced to everyone on Capitol Hill that following the implementation of the Homestead Act last year, his government had promulgated a new bill to implement the Emancipation Proclamation throughout the United States and liberate all blacks in the United States. Remember, it is the entire United States. This is too much? The Confederate States of America in the South directly called out to Lincoln that if the bill was not revoked, the South would launch a powerful attack on the North. In response, all European countries were silent. Although Europe had already promulgated various laws prohibiting the sale of slaves more than 20 years ago, it was also very disgusted with the sale of black slaves on plantations in the southern United States. But it is okay to blame others for doing bad things, but that does not affect their own interests. Although the black slaves in the southern plantations are helping the South to grow crops, many of the crops they grow are actually sold to countries such as Britain at low prices. In other words, many European countries have benefited from the results of these black slaves. Although countries have praised Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation for the disgust of their people, they actually blame Lincoln for making trouble in their hearts. Therefore, countries agreed with Lincoln in the North on the surface, but privately sold all kinds of guns and cannons directly to Jefferson Hamilton Davis, the President of the Confederate States of the South, with the dissatisfaction of revenge. According to the data held by William IV, Britain actually agreed privately to transfer more than 200,000 active guns and 1,000 war horses to the American Confederacy in the South, which was relatively weak in industry. France also supplied 1,000 cannons to the South. Even Spain seems to have provided it with more than 50,000 guns. It can be called a large military order. The United States of America in the North, due to its strong industrial strength, did not have an urgent need for guns, but it was quite lacking in military tactical skills. So they asked the Russian Empire, the Prussian Palace, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands to send army and navy professionals to support their army training, and even made requests to France. Since the original American Civil War began, it was divided into the United States of America in the North and the Confederate States of America in the South, and began to be recognized by various countries. The situation on both sides has reached a balance, and the United States has actually gradually calmed down. However, the emergence of this declaration is the pain of uprooting the South. How can the South bear not to go crazy? Since the American Civil War, we have only insisted on fighting based on the constitutional principles, seeking only to achieve the complete unification of the Federation, without involving the abolition of slavery. In addition, after more than 2 years of fighting, although both sides have won and lost, the South has generally won more. At the beginning, our approach was deeply popular among the people, and was more conducive to stabilizing the former slave states that remained in the Federation and coaxing them not to rebel. Therefore, at the beginning I always put the overall situation first and did not involve the issue of abolition, which the people could still understand. But now that the war has lasted for more than a year, the slave owners in the South not only have no intention of reconciliation, but are also arrogant. Faced with this situation, the people have begun to object to the policies of our cabinet government. Moreover, the people's enthusiasm for joining the army was originally out of righteous indignation. They wanted to restore national unity and eliminate the inhumane slave owners. Britain and France tried their best to interfere in our internal war, and they continued to express their willingness to stand on the side of the Southern Confederacy. If we cannot defeat the South quickly, once Britain, France and other countries intervene, the situation will be even more serious. As you can see, since the war broke out, people from all over the country have marched, held opportunities, and submitted petitions, asking us to put the overall situation first, not to avoid the abolition of slavery, but also to be decisive and innovative. They even proposed that in addition to liberating black slaves, they should be allowed to join the army, give farmers land, give people land, and severely punish the gangsters who are harmful in the rear, replace incompetent people, etc. As expected, my cabinet government has done it. On May 20, 1863, we followed the will of the people and resolutely promulgated the Homestead Act, announcing that any adult who is loyal to the United States of America can get 160 acres of land in the West as long as he pays $10. After 5 years of cultivation, the land will belong to him. Its promulgation was warmly welcomed by the people. Our popularity rose sharply. But the people also realized that if the South was not defeated and the federal government agreed, the Homestead Act would be difficult to implement, because the Western territories were not occupied by the North and the South, and they belonged to the entire United States. So many people signed up for the army and were enthusiastic. This led to a wave of Northern military enlistment. 2 months later, our cabinet government promulgated the Confiscation Act, which stipulated that all the property of anyone who was found to have betrayed the Federation would be confiscated and all the people would be liberated. The president had the right to recruit slaves to quell the rebellion, and this law was welcomed by the people. This was the beginning of another wave of people's enthusiasm to join the army. On November 30, 1864, we issued the pre-announcement Emancipation Proclamation, announcing that slaves in the rebellious southern states would be liberated from January 1, 1865, and all black slaves would become free men and could join the Navy and Army of the United States of America. Lincoln was optimistic about all the members sitting in Congress, his eyes were unusually bright, and his tone was sincere and passionate at the same time. It is December 2, 1864, less than a month before it takes effect. Congressman, you must hurry back to your constituency and mobilize your supporters to ask them to complete the abolition deployment as soon as possible within this month. This time, I will completely cut off the firewood from the South. As the content of Lincoln's speech in the Congress of the Confederate States of America was passed on, emotions were mixed all over the world. South America was naturally excited. With the United States joining this team, only the Confederate States of America was still holding on to this backward system on this continent. What made these South American countries even happier was that a powerful United States made them very afraid, especially when Monroe issued the Monroe American policy to resist the invasion of European countries, which made them happy and grateful. In the end, it became the Monroe Doctrine, with South America as his sphere of influence, and South America's resistance and dissatisfaction with the United States. This made their relationship with the United States not harmonious. So if you say that Britain is the country that likes the division of the United States the most, no one objects, but in the subsequent rankings, South America is definitely at the top. Because of the division of the United States, their pressure has been reduced, and such a United States in a civil war is the one they dare to approach. Therefore, South American countries were divided into two groups, one led by Argentina and the other led by Brazil, supporting the United States of America and the Confederate States of America in the North respectively. Instantly, two major camps appeared in South America, and the direction of the entire America attracted the attention of Europe. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190 The Civil War between the North and the South enters a white deterioration. Although Lincoln took great risks in this move, it was of far-reaching significance. Fighting for freedom became an inspiring battle cry, injecting new vitality into the Civil War and becoming a boost for the North. Attracted by freedom, slaves in the South crossed the dividing line between the North and the South, and a large number of blacks joined the army to fight against the Southern Confederacy. The South was naturally unwilling to lag behind, and took action as the Davis government warned. So, on the first cold day of December, President Davis, under the various pressures from the huge plantations in the South, directly ordered General Robert Edward Lee, the commander of the South, to launch a full-scale attack on the North. The American Civil War is another opportunity for the Netherlands. We cannot miss any opportunity for the Netherlands to expand its power in America. The Privy Council meeting in Amsterdam continued in the Netherlands, and William Ivey issued an order. On December 5, 1864, at a press conference, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in addition to expressing satisfaction with the results of the peace talks between Denmark, Prussia and Austria held in Gothenburg, the second largest city in Sweden, also expressed concern about the Civil War in North America. He asked both sides to sit down for peace talks and expressed the Netherlands' appreciation for Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Hespert van said at the press conference, "There are many indigenous people in our overseas provinces of the Netherlands, and we respect them very much. In Africa, we have more than 10 million black residents in the Netherlands, and there are tens of millions of indigenous people in the East Indies, Australia and many Pacific islands. We don't think that slaves are good for countries. They are also human beings. They also have the right to enjoy the prosperous life of the Netherlands freely. Therefore, the Netherlands supports Lincoln's policy because it is our national policy. As for the South and the North, the Netherlands is willing to have normal economic and political exchanges with the South. For the Netherlands, they will treat them equally." With the first statement of the status of indigenous people in the Far East such as Africa and the East Indies at the press conference, Foreign Minister Hespert van made his first statement on the status of indigenous people in the Far East such as Africa and the East Indies. After the proposal of the members of the Dutch Parliament, the Dutch Parliament unanimously passed the proposal of the Dutch Colored Equality Law, and the Dutch government immediately took effect. After that, the Dutch Minister of the Interior, General, held a press conference of the Ministry of the Interior and announced that the Dutch government began to register residents in the global Dutch territory and conduct equal Dutch identity certification. So, under the surprised eyes of the world, the Netherlands actually ran ahead of the United States of America, which was only implemented on January 1, 1865, and actually began to implement a policy of racial equality on December 10, 1864. This caused a huge sensation in Europe. This naturally has a copycat effect. Austria, Britain, France, Italy, Spain, Prussia, Sweden, Portugal and other countries, all followed the Netherlands in just a few days and implemented various modified racial policies. As for why Austria is in the forefront, it is because the proportion of Austrians in the Austrian Empire is not very high in the country, so the Dutch racial law just happens to be the right medicine for Austrian national governance, which makes up for the current domestic struggles in Austria to a certain extent. Therefore, although the Netherlands has never been cold, it is the fastest to imitate this time. As for other countries, it is because they have seen that the Netherlands has successively divided the East Indies into provinces for management and calculated the status of the indigenous people. Now even the blacks in Africa have begun to register as Dutch, which is still very shocking for all countries. But after being surprised, I saw that the Netherlands began to be supported by the indigenous people and black people in the area. This was also worth borrowing for those countries that also had colonies in Africa. Although changes were made to the Dutch colored equality law, it was because of this law that the indigenous people in various parts of Africa, which had just become colonies, became quieter and no longer resisted. However, unlike the Netherlands' recognition of the top-level design from above, the European countries all looked at the indigenous people in the colonies with arrogance. William IV found it incredible to change their views. Even in the Netherlands, there were many people who thought so. But this is also a long-term project and cannot be rushed. At present, the situation in the Americas has attracted the attention of the world, and William IV also knows that America is the direction of promoting the development of the Netherlands in the Far East, and the northern countries in the Far East are also the driving force for the economic development of the Netherlands in the Far East. Therefore, the development of the situation in the Americas this time will be an opportunity for the Far East. Especially now that the United States of America is not favored by major powers such as Britain, France, and Spain, the Australian continent and other places will accept industrial and talent transfers. Compared with the conservatism of the rest of the world, especially Europe, Australia will be a place with unique advantages. Therefore, William IV pointed out in the Privy Council that the Netherlands cooperated with Britain, France and other countries to create discord between the North and South of North America, causing them to divide and fight for a long time. At the same time, he asked to guide American public opinion to develop in a situation that is conducive to the construction wave of the Netherlands in the Far East. After that, William IV even pointed out several directions, such as economic industry, military equipment manufacturing, etc., which are all projects needed by Australia. In short, I hope that the current industrial base of the United States can become a wedding dress for the Netherlands. Not to mention all, at least we have to share a piece of the pie. On December 24, 1864, a remarkable and grand battle took place between the two countries in North and South America. The location was in Virginia. George McClellan, the commander of the Northern Army, had participated in many battles before, such as the Battle of the Valley and the Battle of the Peninsula. He had led the Union Army to invade Virginia many times, hoping to attack Richmond, the capital of the Southern Confederacy. However, General Robert Lee and his men repeatedly repelled their invasions with outstanding tactics, especially in the two battles of Manassas. General Stonewall Jackson, an outstanding Southern general who was deeply loved by Robert Lee, repeatedly defeated the enemy with a small number of people and won decisive victories, which overwhelmed the Northern federal government. After that, the Confederate Army took the initiative, crossed the Potomac River, and launched a Battle of Maryland, which was the first invasion to the north. However, it was blocked by the Northern Federal Army in the Battle of Sandsburg, and had to cross the Potomac River and retreat. The North thought it could pursue the victory, but when it intercepted the Union Army on the flank in the east of the Blue Ridge, it failed because it was not as fast as the Union Army. This allowed the Union Army to escape successfully, and the Northern Union Army could not further attack them. However, this battle regained a lot of initiative, and they could attack again at any time. But President Lincoln would naturally not give General McClellan so much time. Seeing that he had not achieved a decisive victory for a long time, he was disappointed. The restlessness of those members of Congress put Lincoln under great pressure, which made him lose his patience. In the end, under pressure, he replaced McClellan with Ambrose Burnside to lead the Union Army. Richmond, the capital of the Southern Confederacy. Temporary replacement of generals is a taboo, President. It seems that Lincoln is really anxious now, said Alexander Stephens, Vice President of the Confederate States of America, sarcastically. President Davis frowned. Just now, the commander-in-chief, General Robert Lee, said that it was a pity, Davis explained to the surprised Stevens, because General Robert Lee felt that he knew McClellan very well, and was worried that Lincoln would replace the commander again and again, until he replaced him with someone he was not familiar with. This reduced his tactical and strategic advantages, and it was a loss rather than an advantage for us. Stevens was a little unhappy when he heard this, but he could only hold it back, because it was Robert Lee who said it. If it were someone else, he would have accused the other party of being timid and launched a condemnation. Even he had to hold it back, because the other party's prestige in the military was too high. Moreover, the Union Army was now fighting fiercely with the Northern Federal Army, and Robert Lee at this time was the cornerstone and difficult to shake. Therefore, he knew the situation and chose to remain silent. In fact, it was Robert Lee who was overly worried. On December 24, 1864, Ambrose Burnside, who had just been replaced by Lincoln to command the entire Northern Confederate Army, decided to launch a new battle to quell the Southern rebellion. He chose to first attack Fredericksburg near the Potomac River, and then marched straight to Richmond. He began to form a corps of 130,000 people in 3 divisions. In addition to 10,000 people doing logistics in the rear, the other 120,000 were sent to participate in the Battle of Fredericksburg. He ordered the right wing of the army to be led by Edwin Sumner, including the 2nd Army, the 9th Army, and a cavalry brigade. The Center Army was led by Major General Joseph Hooker, including the 3rd Army, the 5th Army and a cavalry brigade. The left wing of the army was led by William Franklin, including the 1st Army, the 6th Army and a cavalry brigade. The others were the 11th Army and the 12th Army, which were deployed in Fayette County and Harper's Ferry respectively. The Confederate States of the South was led by General Robert Lee, with a total of 72,500 soldiers. The right wing was used to deal with General Edwin Sumner of the North, and General James Longstreet. The one who dealt with Joseph Hooker of the North's left wing was General Thomas Jackson. The one who dealt with the center was General Jackson, and the other artillery regiments and cavalry regiments. The two sides opened up again. This attracted the attention of all countries again. The civilians lamented that war hurt people a lot, and the nobles lamented that it was too easy to get promoted in war. Look at the officials in the United States, they can get promoted as soon as they say so. It is true that fighting in war is a good way to get promoted. Chapter 191, American Northern and Southern Spheres of Influence. 1864, both sides spent Christmas Eve and Christmas in peace. Just 5 days before the Emancipation Proclamation issued by Lincoln officially took effect, the North-South War officially began after the early morning of December 26. In this Battle of Fredericksburg, the Potomac Army of the Confederate States of America suffered heavy casualties, while the Northern Virginia Army of the Confederate States of America defeated the enemy in exchange for peace before the New Year's Day. In this battle, the total casualties of the Northern Confederacy were 12,600, including more than 5,500 deaths, 5,700 injuries, and 1,400 captured and missing. The total casualties of the Confederate States of America were more than 5,500, with only 600 deaths, 4,000 injuries, and more than 600 captured and missing. London, England. At this point, the territories of the North and the South are difficult to change again. The Confederate States of America in the South now owns the following territories: 1 South Carolina, 2 Mississippi, 3 Florida, 4 Alabama, 4 Georgia, 6 Louisiana, 7 Texas, 8 Virginia, 9 Arkansas, 10 Tennessee, 11 North Carolina, 12 Missouri, 13 Kentucky. And the Confederate States of America in the North: 1 Minnesota, 2 Vermont, 3 New Hampshire, 4 Massachusetts, 5 Connecticut, 6 Rhode Island, 7 New York, 8 Pennsylvania, 9 West Virginia, 10 Maryland, 11 Delaware, 12 Ohio, 13 Indiana, 14 Illinois, 15 Missouri, 16 Kansas, 17 Iowa, 18 Wisconsin, 19 Michigan, 20 New Jersey. British Foreign Secretary Russell had just been summoned to Buckingham Palace by Queen Victoria. Prime Minister Viscount Palmerston and British Crown Prince Edward were already there. As soon as he sat down, he was asked about the situation in the United States, so he chose to analyze the current territory of the United States in the North and South. The West is now the target of both sides. Can our British Empire take advantage of the practice of taking advantage of the situation and get some benefits from their West? Prince Edward couldn't help asking. Since Alexander rejected his love and married King William IV of the Netherlands last year, this angered the crown prince of the most powerful country in the world. Although he tried to persuade the Queen and the Prime Minister to put various pressures on the Netherlands several times but failed, he was very happy when he saw that the Netherlands was attacked and defeated by Portugal in West Africa. When Denmark was attacked by the German Confederation some time ago, he was even inexplicably happy. Obviously, he hated Denmark for not choosing to marry the powerful British Empire but choosing the Netherlands. Now it can be said that it is just self-humiliation. Although the Netherlands later turned the tide and won the victory, after these 2 times of venting with the help of others, Prince Edward's hatred actually decreased. Therefore, Queen Victoria recently allowed him to participate in more national governance, just like the British policy for the Schleswig War that was formulated some time ago, and the Queen also brought him to participate in this U.S. conference. Difficult, Russell said, although the United States is now deliberately divided into North and South by various countries, which makes the North very helpless, it can be regarded as being forced to accept it. However, Lincoln does not want to bear the reputation of being a divided country, so he is struggling. It can be said that he is trying his best to reduce the loss of territory. Davis in the South is also almost the same. He doesn't care so much about occupying one more place. But Lincoln is different. His reputation has been damaged. In terms of future positioning, if the West is occupied by Britain again, it will be absolutely unacceptable to him. Therefore, the North-South front of both sides can stop the evenly matched struggle, but Lincoln is ambitious about the West. Especially Seward, who represents the big consortium in the government. He, as the Secretary of State, has never forgotten to lead the American consortium to the West. It was precisely because of his strategy of leading the industrial consortium to the West that the Southern plantation slave owners who also wanted to develop the Southern model in the West were dissatisfied, and the war broke out. Therefore, if Britain gets involved, it may make the North and the South put aside their prejudices and unite against us. It's not worth the loss. But they are so passionate, said Prince Edward unwillingly. Viscount Palmerston said, everything is absolute. The territory belongs to them. They can quarrel and divide the property internally, but if outsiders want to seize it, do you think their brothers will agree? Upon hearing this, Prince Edward stopped talking immediately. Obviously, this metaphor is appropriate and clear. Seeing this, Russell said to the Queen, now the North and the South seem to be fighting fiercely in the East and the Middle, but their eyes are on the Western states. Amsterdam in the Netherlands is also discussing the situation in the United States. Just now, everyone was given the distribution of power between the North and the South. Hey but Von, the distribution of the Southern states is like that, let's talk about the West. At present, Oregon and California in the Western United States are loyal to the Northern Confederacy, while the Arizona region in the South is biased towards the Southern Confederacy. As for the Indiana region in the middle, it is impartial. The remaining neutral areas include New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, Washington, Nebraska, Dakota, etc., which are the areas that both the North and the South are fighting for. Some time ago, the Indiana region was wooed by both sides, and it almost turned into a tug-of-war. Both sides almost sent troops there to fight. Therefore, all regions are now in an unclear situation, and no one is willing to make a decision to side easily. William IV asked Mark Rudd, Chief of Staff of the Ministry of Defense, if we belong to the South, which area in the West will be the fastest, safest and most effective to attack? Mark Lew didn't even think about it. He stood up and pointed to the northern part of Arizona in the west and said, here, if I were Robert Reed, it would be the easiest to take here directly, and it would also make it easier for Arizona to return to its heart. Moreover, as long as this place is taken, then for the Southern Confederacy, it will lead directly to California, which is loyal to the Southern Confederacy, on the western Pacific coast. If Davis can attack there again, then the South will have the capital to really challenge the North. And here, it can be used as a springboard to attack multiple areas in the North, which can be called the best enclave in the United States. Including William IV, they all looked at the location of northern Arizona. It's true that it's close to California in the west, Arizona in the south, and Texas and the Confederacy in the east. The Northeast is close to Indiana, and the North is Colorado, Utah, and Nevada. William IV smiled and said, looking at this map, I am interested in the future development of the North and the South. He added in his heart, compared with the superpower United States that dominated the world in the previous life, the current divided United States, I am more interested in their future. Chapter 192 Big Fish turns out to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives. 1865, the Northern American Confederacy, which was at war with the United States and North America, officially implemented the Emancipation Proclamation to liberate black slaves. The Southern American Confederacy, composed of slave owners, launched a fierce attack. The Battle of Fredericksburg, which had just ended with the victory of the South. The South wanted to pursue the victory, so the two sides launched another war in Chancellorsville, Virginia on January 8, 1865. The main generals of the North and the South in this battle were Robert Lee and Joseph Hooker. The Northern Federal Army lost more than 5,700 people, 11,000 people were injured, and more than 4,000 people were captured and missing. The Southern Confederate Army lost more than 3,600 people and 9,200 people were injured. It should be said that the total number of troops deployed in the North exceeded 150,000, while the number in the South was 65,000. This battle was another great victory for the South. President Lincoln once again faced the pressure from Congress. Fortunately, because the Emancipation Proclamation was implemented this month, blacks continued to flee to the North, and the situation seemed to have begun to turn, and the scales began to develop in a direction that was favorable to the Northern Federation. Elihu B. Washburne, the Secretary of the Interior of the United States, has been in the spotlight recently. The implementation of the Emancipation Proclamation marked that blacks began to gain identity recognition in the United States, and also changed the political ecology of the United States. Originally, only white people could run for the presidential election, but now black slaves have also become one of the sources of votes. With the rapid growth of blacks, the political elections in the federal country will break the current balance. Therefore, many people have both love and hate for Lincoln's issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation. As one of the drafters, Elihu B. Washburne, together with Attorney General James Speed, has become the most influential person in the hearts of black people in the United States, second only to President Lincoln. Amsterdam, the Netherlands. William Ivey is listening to North American intelligence from Mackay Sean, the director of Dutch international intelligence. In particular, he has always been concerned about changes in American politics. Now this makes Seward, the Secretary of State of the Northern Confederacy, very dissatisfied. Because he also has ideas about the next Confederate election in 1869, and with the rise of these two people, Seward, the Secretary of State, seems to have begun to think of a decline in Lincoln's cabinet government. Andrew Johnson, the Vice President from North Carolina in the South, has been deliberately guided by some people to attract waves of criticism in the Confederacy. As long as the South does not reunite with the North, then he, the Vice President, will have no chance to become the President of the Confederacy. Every attack from the South will cause Andrew Johnson, the Vice President of Reina, who is also the Speaker of the Senate, to be one step further away from the presidency. However, the person who attracts attention is Schuyler Colfax, who has been elected to the House of Representatives since 1854 and was elected Speaker of the House of Representatives in 1863, the year before last. His 3-year term as Speaker expired in March this year. Because he became the leader of the radical faction in the Republican Party, many people predicted that his re-election as Speaker of the House of Representatives was not a sure thing, but at least many Republicans were inclined to his re-election. Your Majesty, this person is just like many of his predecessors. He was also ambitious during his tenure. Does he have any signs? He often maintains a friendly and amiable signature smile, but he is very frank and does not hide his ambition to covet the presidency. William Ivey instantly thought of the successive speakers of the House of Representatives who were the face of the superpower in later generations. It seemed that the president named Biden always had a smiling face for many years, just like Maitreya Buddha, but his ambition was also never concealed. William Ivey even fantasized that Biden's role model in life might be the person just mentioned by Mackenzian. Thinking of this, he was moved and asked, "Do you have any evidence against this person?" Don't blame William Ivey for his dirty mentality, it's just that the world is like this, especially because of his position. When others are concerned about the superficial wars of various countries, William Ivey has actually begun to infiltrate various countries using the intelligence agency. His big chess piece, Elihu B. Washburne, the current Minister of the Interior of the United States Federation, also has evidence against him. In today's British political arena, he actually carried out targeted intelligence collection and even created it, and also mastered a lot of negative intelligence about British Whig and Tory politicians. Sometimes, these can be unexpected, which is a great benefit to the person who holds it. At least if the negative is big enough, even the current Viscount Palmerston in the UK can be brought down. What's more, it is the United States Federation, which is now known for being law-abiding and dedicated. McCashon said, "After our investigation, we found that he was involved in the bribery case of the United States Bank of Movable Credit. At the same time, we also found out that when he was a member of the Postal Service Committee of Congress in 1862, he accepted a donation of $4,000 for his vice presidential campaign from a contractor who supplied government envelopes." William IV closed his eyes with satisfaction, and then a satisfied light appeared in his eyes, and said, "Isn't that it? In this way, we can hunt down another heavyweight of the Federation." McCashon, "If nothing unexpected happens, yes, William IV, contact the other party as soon as possible, and collect other evidence quickly. I want to see him show a friendly side to the Netherlands quickly." At last, William IV sighed, a Speaker of the House of Representatives, "This is a big fish, enough to eat several meals." McCashon thought to himself, "It's not just a few meals, it should be several years." But when he thought of the many secrets of important politicians from various countries that His Majesty currently holds in his hands, he fell silent. In the Dutch royal palace, the most heavily guarded place is not the palace where the king rests, but the private office where the king works. There is only about 100 square meters of space, and there are more than 20 people on duty in front, behind, left and right, and 3 shifts. It can be said to be extremely strict. Your Majesty, Elihu B. Washburn seems to be very frequent with the Irish recently. He seems to have some actions." William IV said, "So he is not at peace either." McCashon, "With the potato crisis in Britain at the beginning of this century, a large number of Irish people immigrated overseas, and the United States became the first choice, and Britain also let it go. Now in the most concentrated Northern Federation, the power of the Irish has begun to grow rapidly. Due to dissatisfaction with the English and Scots, the Irish formed their own small team. Therefore, their close contact obviously seems to have different views on the President of the Federation." "What different views? Just say that you are ambitious." William IV laughed and scolded. Chapter 193, What is the Netherlands trying to achieve? Isn't his ambition what we need? We should not only not suppress him, but also help him. In McCashon's surprise, William IV said, "Contact Bain, the president of the Dutch Association in North America, and ask him to guide the Dutch to start supporting him. I want to see how big a battle this guy Elihu B. Washburn can make." Recently, with the resolution of the crisis between Denmark and the German Confederation, Ethiopia and Africa have calmed down a little. The remaining North America, the former United States, now the United States of America and the Confederate States of America, are still at war, so they have attracted global attention. Moreover, since this war is the longest war since the 4-year Crimean War between Tsarist Russia and Britain, the Ottoman Empire, France, and Sardinia, now Italy, from 1853 to 1856, the troops invested by both the North and the South are almost the same as those in the Crimean War at that time. At that time, the Russian Empire had 700,000 soldiers, while the coalition forces of Britain, France, Austria, and Sarcophagus each invested 200,000, 300,000, 300,000, and 18,000 soldiers. In the end, the Russian Empire suffered 400,000 casualties, while the coalition forces suffered about 250,000. Today, 180,000 soldiers were killed in the north and 150,000 in the south, and 140,000 were injured in the north and 60,000 in the south. In terms of population base, the north has a population of 22.34 million, while the south has a population of 9.1 million. As the Civil War became more and more intense, it seemed that there was no intention to stop, which made the outside world worry that a super battle would eventually be fought in the hinterlands of the North and the South. These prevented many European immigrants from thinking about North America, and even some North American immigrants were planning to leave there and live elsewhere. It's good to go back to Europe, but it seems that the far east of the Netherlands is in the midst of a booming construction boom, which is a better choice. When William IV was discussing the Northern Federation, in other places, they were actually discussing ambitious figures including the Lincoln government. Of course, they themselves were also analyzing their enemies. Salmon Portland Chase, Dutch, The former Federal Treasury Secretary who just stepped down last year and was later nominated and approved as the Chief Justice of the United States, expressed great praise for Secretary of the Interior Elihu B. Washburn at a press conference on January 13, 1865. This is a great move. It has injected vitality into the reconstruction of the United States. The Interior Department under Elihu B. Washburn is very efficient. Therefore, he is a very competent Secretary of the Interior. Just pointed out. However, due to Salmon Portland Chase's position as the Chief Justice of the United States, even a casual statement is enough to make everyone pay attention. Even Lincoln showed surprise and his face was solemn. President Lincoln was like this, let alone Secretary of State Seward. Because when they worked together in Lincoln's cabinet government before, they always confronted the former Secretary of the Treasury Salmon Portland Chase. I thought that this guy had finally left, and a new Secretary of the Treasury had come up, which would make Seward feel at ease and no longer oppose the development of the West. But I never thought that before I could feel at ease for a few days, this guy actually had a relationship with Secretary of the Interior Elihu B. Washburn, who is now a popular figure around Lincoln, and the blacks were extremely grateful to him. And judging from the situation, it showed that the other party supported Elihu B. Washburn politically. Secretary of the Interior plus Chief Justice? This put a lot of pressure on him. He was extremely depressed because when did the Irish and the Dutch become so close? Otherwise, how could these two leaders of different ethnic groups come together? Could it be that because I stopped Lincoln from trading arms with the Netherlands some time ago and interrupted Lincoln's attempt to develop a closer relationship with the Netherlands, this guy Salmon Portland Chase lowered his status and chose to join forces with the Irish Elihu B. Washburn to test me? Seward's head ached. Especially Chase was the founder of the Republican Party. Even Lincoln had to show some respect to him. After all, Lincoln was the first elected president since the establishment of the Republican Party. When Seward was in the head, the federal political arena was in an uproar. Lincoln's deputy, Vice President Andrew Johnson, also stood up and said, "Black lives are also lives. Black people should have the freedom of white people. White people have the right to vote, and black people should also have it." I agree with Elihu B. Washburn's statement. I think black people should not be slaves, but should appear as American citizens. Vice President Andrew Johnson's identity as a Southerner destined his speech to become the focus of attention of both the North and the South. Even Europe has been discussing it. Therefore, as he agreed with Elihu B. Washburn's views and stated his position, the issue of his position that has been discussed in recent times was resolved. Many people in the South ridiculed him for this, mocking him for selling his soul and fellow Southerners for the position of vice president. Not to mention the situation between the North and the South in the United States. Back to the Netherlands, or more precisely, back to the far east of the Netherlands. Australia, Sydney. Now there is a booming construction boom here. Hi, Joe, business is good recently. That's not good, it's a sign of making a fortune. That's right, look at Sydney. In just 1 or 2 years, it seems to have changed its appearance. The population has exceeded 500,000 and it has become the largest city in the Netherlands. Look at the construction infrastructure here. It's neat and spacious. Horses running on it feel like they are galloping. Don't you see what the announcement on the Sydney Town Hall said? This is a road. There will be other means of transportation in the future, not just horses. I know, it's bicycles. There are bicycles everywhere on the streets of the Netherlands now, and 2-person bicycles that can also carry people. I even saw the news some time ago that Edison, a young scientist from the William Group, has innovated a bicycle that can be pedaled by 1 person, 2 people, or even 3 or 4 people at the same time based on plastic tires. The report quoted by the Sydney Daily News said that Europe and even the world will enter a major transformation in transportation. In addition to the previous British steam trains, the Netherlands is now promoting cheap, good quality and easy-to-operate bicycles, which will bring trends to the world and sweep the world. Affecting his daily life? Yet, I saw the news some time ago. There was a bicycle race in the Netherlands. Well, it seemed to be held in the second largest city, Rotterdam. It is said that the winner of that race can get up to 10 bicycles as rewards. You know, the current price of these bicycles is not cheap. It is almost half a year's salary for us. If we win, it is equivalent to working 5 years less. I am so envious. Alice, you should be content. Everyone in the world knows that under the leadership of His Majesty William IV, the Kingdom of the Netherlands treats its overseas natives the best. The life nowadays can be said to be something we have never thought of before. I say the same to you guys. Don't always think about those messy things. Look around the world. There are still white countries that are so good to us colored races. Be careful that other compatriots complain that you are destroying the image of our East Indian natives. Go, you are still talking about us. Look, you said you are a native, but we are Dutch now. Looking at the ridicule of several friends, Megawando's heart was throbbing. The Netherlands actually gave them the nationality of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which they had never expected. Although the Netherlands had colonized the East Indies for many years, the previous cruelty had caused dissatisfaction among the locals. However, after 1857, the Dutch government seemed to have changed its strategy, using a soft policy and a little welfare, slowly guiding the changes of their indigenous people. In just a few years, millions of indigenous people began to accept the rule of the Netherlands. For this reason, a few years ago, the Dutch Indigenous Army was established to help the Netherlands conquer the East and West in Africa, and it seemed to be integrated into the management of the Netherlands. According to him and several of his friends who were also indigenous people, this was the Netherlands learning from the British Indian subcontinent to train local troops and assist British management. So a few years ago, several people started to sign up for the school founded by the Dutch in Jakarta. Because their families were also well off, they had learned a lot of Dutch primary education knowledge before, so it was not difficult for them. After the top universities in the Netherlands established branches in the Far East 2 years ago, several people followed their families to Australia, which was newly acquired by the Netherlands, for various reasons such as family business and career, and became part of the migrant population in Sydney. In the past 2 years, he watched Sydney gradually transform from a small town originally built in the UK into a booming construction boom. It is now almost as large as Jakarta where they once lived, and the buildings here are more exquisite. He signed up for an architecture class, so seeing these tall buildings in front of him gave him a clearer understanding of his future. I must be a world-renowned architect, build the world's top buildings, and be world-renowned. He even thought about his current identity. Name, Megawando hometown, Kingdom of the Netherlands, New South Wales, Australia, Sydney City. Date of birth, May 10, 1845. Now we are all Dutch nationals, but I don't know what the Dutch government thinks. In the past 2 years, more than 1 million people have immigrated to Africa, and there are also more than 1 million people on various islands. Add them together, the base number remains unchanged, and the population still reaches tens of millions. Add in the 20 million people in Africa. Aren't William IV and the Dutch cabinet afraid that our population will be larger than theirs and difficult to manage? Yes, according to the population report of the Dutch government published in major Dutch newspapers last year, the current number of white Dutch people is 8.8 million, which is about the same as ours. That is, it only accounts for about 1/3 of the total population. Isn't the Dutch government afraid of us? Yes, isn't the Dutch government afraid? This is also the confusion of the British government. The British government is studying this issue recently. In the eyes of Viscount Palmerston's cabinet, this is more attractive than the American Civil War. Even Queen Victoria keeps asking about it. It can be seen that the Netherlands' move to accept the colored people in the colonies as citizens has aroused doubts in Europe. What is the Netherlands trying to do? Chapter 194. How should the Netherlands manage the indigenous people? The Dutch Privy Council held its latest meeting. The meeting was also attended by Jan Simskerk, the Governor-General of the East Indies who had returned from the Far East. Many people are puzzled as to why we include people of color in the nationality. William IV said to the members of the Dutch Privy Council, "I have been reading a book recently. It was given to me by Jan Simskerk, the Governor-General of the East Indies from the Far East. It is from the ancient Qing Empire. It was translated by the Dutch in the Far East. It talks about the local customs and the vast land and resources of various places. But the part one I'm most interested in is that someone mentioned that people are divided into different classes. Jan Simskerk, the Governor-General of the East Indies, can you tell us how the Qing Empire divides classes?" Jan Simskerk nodded in response. Many things in the Qing dynasty are divided into very detailed levels, and are divided into top middle, top bottom, middle up, middle bottom, bottom top, bottom middle, bottom, 3, 6, 9, etc. Except for William IV, who was obviously calm, the other people in the Privy Council were confused and surprised, and their scalps tingled. Jan Simskerk explained, they divided it into the upper 9 classes. The catchphrases: first-class Buddha, second-class heaven, third-class emperor, fourth-class official, fifth-class cabinet elder, sixth-class prime minister, seventh-class promotion, eighth-class selection, and ninth-class scholarship. The middle 9 classes: first-class scholar, second-class doctor, third-class painter, fourth-class leather, shadow puppet, fifth-class singing, sixth-class fortune-telling, seventh-class monk, eighth-class Taoist, and ninth-class chess and piano. The lower 9 classes: first-class high-end, opera singing, second-class blowing, third-class circus, fourth-class push, shaving, fifth-class pool, northern bathhouse, sixth-class back rubbing, seventh-class repair, eighth-class breeding livestock, and ninth-class prostitute. James Simcock explained the meaning of each word related to the Qing dynasty before he said, "To put it simply, people are divided into 10 classes, noble and humble. In the northern Qing Empire in the Far East, there were therefore 1 official, 2 clerks, 3 monks, 4 Taoists, 5 doctors, 6 workers, 7 craftsmen, 8 prostitutes, 9 Confucian scholars, and 10 beggars." William Ivey said, "Look, the country where the Qing dynasty is located is said to have a history of thousands of years. Although it is not necessarily more prosperous than us economically now, there are things worth learning from in the long river of history. As far as I know, the initial stage of the early cabinet system of the British Empire actually referred to the cabinet system of the dynasties hundreds or thousands of years before the empire, that is to say, their prime minister and bachelor system." Seeing that they didn't believe him, William Ivey asked Jan Simcock, who was familiar with the thousands of years of history of the Qing Empire, to explain the evolution of the government in the country's emperor-ruled countries. As he started from the Xia and Shang dynasties, he came to the current Qing Empire step by step. Everyone was attracted by the magnificent and ups and downs of the country's changes, and everyone had a sigh on their face. Philip Howe, the Deputy Minister of Industry of the Netherlands. Although he had known that the country was extraordinary, he had only known a simple overview before, but he had never wanted to understand it in such detail. Like many people present, his energy was used to understand the history of Europe in the past few hundred years. He was not very good at the Qing dynasty, so he couldn't help but exclaimed, "Sure enough, no great country is established simply." The Minister of the Interior, Chancellor, also exclaimed with amazement, "It's hard to imagine that the current ruler of the Qing dynasty is just a small nation that counterattacked to complete the rule of the citizens of a great country. Your Majesty, it seems that you didn't derive the idea from the Qing people's rule over that country?" "Yes," said William Ivey, "the Qing dynasty defeated the enemy with fewer troops and completed the ruling power in terms of military strength. Later, they integrated into the local customs and were no different from the previous dynasty in terms of governance. The Qing people of the Qing Empire could do it, so why can't we do it?" William Ivey said solemnly, "Ladies and gentlemen, Britain has 30 million people and France has more than this number, so these 2 countries can use local soldiers to maintain their rule over local colonies. They can provide such manpower and material resources. Moreover, the domestic market is large enough to support the ruling colonies and the rapid industrial development in the country. The Netherlands needs industrial development, and in terms of manpower, it needs to change the traditional concept of planting. You can look at the gap between the North and the South in the United States and the United States. The South is inefficient and relies on planting. The instability of black slaves in terms of manpower has caused social unrest. The North is because of industrial development. The scale of economic development is even comparable to that of the South. The industrial output value of the North is $1.5 billion versus $15.5 million in the South, and the GDP is more than 10 times different. The population of 22.34 million versus 9.1 million, you can imagine how big the gap is between them. The Netherlands cannot waste too much human resources on planting, but food security is also the national policy of the Netherlands. So William Ivey looked around and said seriously, in this era when Europe began to abolish slavery, instead of passively accepting their enslavement to help us grow food, and finally getting into trouble with the United States, it is better to cut it off now and do it in one step, completing the identity transformation of these indigenous people and blacks. In fact, they still do the same work, but in terms of patriotism, it is a drastic change. In the past, they were forced to fight, but now asking them to join the military service is an obligation and responsibility, no longer forced but should be. In all aspects of social work, there are always people to do the dirty and clean work, and after these indigenous people and blacks join, when they compete for a position in front of us Dutch, everyone should know what the result will be. So in the case of low competitiveness in upper positions, they will be at the bottom of society. Complete the rise of the Dutch to the upper class. Of course, we can help them appropriately in various aspects of public security and their reasonable demands, so that they will be willing to return. Of course, the media constantly resolves disputes and even cites comparisons with other countries, such as how miserable the indigenous people in the colonies of Britain, France and other countries are, to highlight their hard-won environment, so that their inner sense of comparison is satisfied, and they can better accept the environment and atmosphere we create for them. And these changes have enabled the Netherlands' 9 million people to free up a lot of people to do other things. Just think about it, how much power this will have. The natives are at the bottom, and the Dutch have become the upper class. Samuel Horch, the Deputy Minister of Agriculture of the Netherlands, hesitated and couldn't help asking, "Your Majesty, I think this will cause a social rupture. The hierarchy is too clear. I'm afraid it will cause ethnic disputes." At that time Prime Minister Thorbecke explained on behalf of William IV at this time, "Therefore, we created an elite policy." What elite policy? Jeremy Harman, the Deputy Minister of Education of the Netherlands, also stood up and asked curiously. The three of them are all deputy ministers of departments. Their superiors are currently sent to the Far East to gradually reduce the cabinet government to develop the Far East. Therefore, the three of them are currently attending the Privy Council meeting on behalf of their respective departments. No matter where you are, society will always be a minority of the powerful and a majority of the powerless. This is the concept of the composition of the power pyramid. The people who are responsible for the distribution of social benefits are always a minority. Therefore, policies are never formulated by the general public, and the power of formulation has always been in the hands of a few people. And the small group of people who rule the majority does not mean that they completely represent the interests of the majority, so there will be a gap, so this does not mean that other people's minorities are the upper class. Prime Minister Thorbecke said this, and then said, however, after referring to other countries, "Your Majesty, and I feel that in order to maintain stability and avoid the situation in the United States, or even a recurrence of the Great Revolution in Europe in 1848, there must be a process channel for non-elites to rise to elite status. And it happens continuously, but we can control its fast and slow rhythm, so that the general public, these non-elites, can only subconsciously feel that instead of resisting, which is thankless and may cost their lives, it is better to work a little harder, become the elites at the top of society, join the basic view of this circle, and become the ruling group of the Netherlands." Hearing this, everyone changed color. In fact, there are also people present who have advanced from the bottom of society. Civil servants are better, and military officers rely on military merits and other things to fight on the battlefield. Therefore, for what Thorbecke just said, they actually feel the most empathy. Thorbecke, this part of the elite may have slightly deviated views due to their background, but in general, they will agree on the basic principles of the social system and many aspects of maintaining the current country, with only a few differences in interests. Therefore, as long as the government grasps the general direction and follows up the changes in the values we need them to change with the changes in national policies, it can alleviate or even prevent accidents such as political changes. In short, it is to complete the development of the minority elites in society to guide the majority of people and influence them to follow the route of the geese in front of them. Continue to dominate the country's pace of progress. William IV said, "Everyone wants a better living environment. We can promote some people who are loyal to the Kingdom of the Netherlands and have talents among the indigenous people and blacks, give them channels for development, and try out the election of members of local governments and local councils in villages and towns. These institutions can effectively help us manage their ethnic groups. Of course, we also need to take charge of the general direction. They will appear in an auxiliary role first, and then slowly increase their power, but the process can be gradual. Slowly reserve local talents, and then select them from these reserve talents to gradually take on higher-level roles." William IV said with shining eyes, "When they gradually occupy important social positions and establish close relations with the economy and politics of the Netherlands, they will try to change their original indigenous colors to cater to our big divide in the Netherlands, and they will lead the people below. And the people below will also give feedback to all the indigenous people, telling them that it is difficult for thousands of troops to cross a single plank bridge, but the bridge is there, and we have set the rules. Whether they continue to stay there and watch others carefully pass by to become upper-class people, or follow the squeeze and collision to grab a position, that is what they should worry about. Those who pass will form their own cultural circle with self-importance, because they will have similar backgrounds and energy, and will not allow others to slander their hard-earned social status. They will cooperate with the rule of the Netherlands and maintain their status, which is the greatest common denominator. Finally, William IV, the upward channel for the indigenous elites must be opened. This is the best way for us to govern them. If it is done, then the indigenous people will really be our help rather than a problem. When William IV was discussing how to manage the indigenous people, the North and South of North America were engaged in the largest war since the outbreak of the United States. Chapter 195. It turns out that the Netherlands has a big brand hidden. 1865, a series of battles broke out in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the former United States, now the northern United States, which attracted the attention of the world. Even William IV, who was holding a Privy Council meeting, interrupted various topics and looked at the east coast of North America across the Atlantic. Gettysburg was originally a small village in southern Pennsylvania. Before the outbreak of the war, it was a fruit-producing and processing place. With the change of the war situation, Gettysburg gradually evolved into a battlefield between the North and the South, and the peace of the past disappeared without a trace. On January 17, 1865, Robert Lee, commander of the Confederate States, and the Federal Army began a 3-day and 3-night fierce battle here. The battle ended with the victory of the Northern Federal Army. This was the largest and most casualty battle since the American Civil War. On January 15, the Southern generals Hill and Ewell successfully led the army to arrive at Gettysburg first and occupied a strong position. Faced with the Southern Confederate Army, which had an advantage in military strength, General Hancock, the general of the Northern Confederate States of America, quickly adjusted the army, reorganized, built fortifications, and prepared to attack the Southern Army led by General Hill from the front. After investigating and asking the locals, Hancock found that the Cemetery Ridge where they were located was easy to defend and difficult to attack, so he led other troops who came to support him to lay out along it to take advantage of the terrain. Sure enough, in the following battle, the Northern Army relied on the dangerous mountain terrain to crush the attacks of the Southern Confederate Army, one after another. At the suggestion of his subordinates, the Southern commander Robert Lee suspended the attack, withdrew his troops for a short time, and decided to reformulate a plan and fight again tomorrow. After research, Robert Lee found that the left wing of the Northern Army was defended by the mountain terrain. If it was forcibly conquered, it would only lose its own troops, so he sent General Ewell to lead an army to raid the right wing of the Northern Federal Army. The Northern Army was caught off guard and forced down Mount Powys. After the Confederates came to their senses, they immediately launched a counterattack. General Ewell of the South was immediately suppressed and even retreated. However, Robert Lee was not a man who gave up easily. He returned on the 19th. First, he bombarded Cemetery Ridge with a cannon, causing the defending Northern Army to counterattack with cannons. The artillery battle often lasted for more than 2 hours, and the air was full of gunpowder. After stopping the attack, Robert Lee was anxious for his men and ordered General Pickett to lead a raiding team across the bushes and force their way into the center of the Federal Army. Since the distance between the two sides was more than 1 mile, this unit became a live target for the Federal Army, with heavy casualties. However, as the team soon reached the north, a hand-to-hand fight broke out, and finally a gap was opened. The South began to rush in, but the North also launched a counterattack, trying to block the gap, so the battle for and counter-battle began. Finally, on the morning of January 20, 1865, after a heavy rain, the entrance on the battlefield was still blocked by the Northern Union Army. Robert Lee could no longer wade across the river and launch another attack. Because of the heavy rain, the North had to cross the swollen river to counterattack, so it gave up the opportunity to destroy the enemy. This war is known as the most intense and bloody battle between the North and the South. The North and the South invested more than 300,000 troops, of which the Union Army invested more than 148,000 and the Union Army invested 156,600. The final casualties were more than 51,000 for the Union Army and more than 75,000 for the Confederate Army. This war caused the Confederacy to suffer a large-scale battle failure for the first time, and the number of casualties on the battlefield was higher than that of the North for the first time. As William IV learned about the Battle of Gettysburg, he predicted, The North has broken up General Robert Lee's attack. Perhaps with the end of this war, a war situation will begin between the North and the South. This time the situation will be reversed. What do you think, Your Majesty? Asked Army Minister Peter de Jong. Originally, before the war, the Southern Army was a battle-hardened army, and had fought many wars with Mexico. The Southern plantations were originally equipped with guns and ammunition to prevent slaves from rebelling. In comparison, the North was an industrial production base. Although guns and ammunition were also produced, their scope of application was very limited, and many people had never held a gun. How could they defeat the other side in the attack launched by the South first? Chief of Staff Mark Rude spoke. Hearing this, Peter de Jong said, "Therefore, in the beginning of the Civil War, the North's retreat was understandable. Naturally, William IV sighed. Before the war, the entire South and the North combined had less than 100,000 regular troops, but it was precisely because of this that Britain no longer wanted to waste its military strength, so it did not launch a major war against the United States." You can imagine how wonderful the faces of Queen Victoria and Viscount Palmerston in London would be now. Hearing this, everyone thought about the scene and couldn't help laughing. William IV was right, but now London is full of discussions. The United States has launched such a large-scale war, with 300,000 troops fighting each other. If Britain rashly participates in it, can it get a good result? How is it possible? As the army in the North is trained and gradually forms a strong military force, the 22 million Americans in the North are only less than 10 million people less than our British Empire. How can our British Empire waste too much military strength on those former prisoners of ours? If we have to fight, we will fight with France, Tsarist Russia and other countries on the European continent. America is still too poor, and the income is not proportional to the cost. You are right. I think it is better to fight there than the Kingdom of the Netherlands on the opposite coast of Europe. At least the lowlands there have abundant food production, and the population has increased by nearly 2 million with immigration to the Far East. The remaining 6 million people are easier to deal with than the 22 million in the North. I almost believed it. If I hadn't heard from a friend of mine who works in a government department that the current Dutch military strength is also top-notch, I almost thought what you said made sense. When did the Netherlands become top-notch? What friend? Can you trust it? Well, of course. He is the team leader of the newly established MI6 in the UK. It is said that the intelligence they received shows that the Netherlands has hidden a lot of strength. In fact, all European countries are more or less trying to find out the truth, but the UK has the most intelligence. That's why, in the past few years, when the Netherlands had conflicts with our British Empire, our government was restrained and did not completely fall out with the Netherlands. No wonder, I said, Viscount Palmerston has become easier to talk to in recent years. He is indifferent to the provocations of the Netherlands. It's not like him at all. It turns out that he has realized the danger. Chapter 196 Royal Family Banquet. Buckingham Palace, London, England. It seems that the media has revealed that the Netherlands has a naval base in the Far East. Yes, but now I don't know who leaked the news. Damn, such important intelligence has put us in a passive position. The Netherlands must have intercepted the news. Prince Edward said with some dissatisfaction. It is now a family gathering of the royal family. At the family dinner, the Queen is sitting in the middle. In addition to Prince Edward, who was born in 1841, there are also Princess Alice, who was born in 1843, Prince Alfred, who was born in 1844, Princess Louise, who was born in 1848, Prince Arthur, who was born in 1850, Prince Leopold, who was born in 1853, and Princess Beatrice, who was born in 18,587. During the entire dinner, except for Prince Leopold, who died the year before last, Princess Victoria, who married Prince Frederick, the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Prussia in 1857, and Princess Helena, who married Prince George of Denmark last year. The rest are all here. Queen Victoria didn't know whether to agree or not, but she turned her head and said to Princess Alice beside her, I heard recently that you are very keen on the politics of the United States and Europe. Alice, tell me what you think of the United States. Alice didn't expect to be asked by the Queen to express her opinion. However, from 1861 to 1863, she began to work as an unofficial secretary beside the Queen, so she had a certain understanding of current affairs. The increasingly serious war trend in the United States some time ago made her pay close attention to the United States, but she didn't expect that she would be discovered by the Queen's mother. So she said helplessly, "I have a classmate who accompanied her husband to Canada to prepare for business some time ago," but she didn't expect that when she arrived in Canada, she found that it had become an economic vessel of the northern United States. Therefore, they can only retreat to London. She even laughed and said that Canada is now becoming an economic colony that the United States and Britain are fighting for. Princess Alice's words made the atmosphere of the entire dinner quiet. Canada is one of the most important overseas colonies of the United Kingdom. Although it has been surpassed economically recently due to the increasing development of India, it is the depth of the United Kingdom in terms of strategic position in the Atlantic Ocean, just like Siberia and Tsarist Russia. Relying on its strong position as a maritime hegemon, the United Kingdom can freely travel in the Atlantic Ocean without hindrance, and even intervene in the American Civil War. Therefore, after hearing what Princess Alice said, even Queen Victoria paused, put the spoon back into the bowl, wiped her mouth, looked up, looked around, and said, "It seems that the British government has not managed the overseas territories well, which has caused heavy losses to the people." After that, her sharp eyes fell on Prince Edward and said, "You have been close to Disraeli recently. Although Viscount Palmerston will not say anything, other Whigs will not be so easy to say. You are the Crown Prince of the United Kingdom, not the Crown Prince of the Tory party. You must be clear about this. Balance is what the superiors need to master the most, but which party and who will form the cabinet when the government forms a cabinet? You all need to be the one who makes the final decision and makes the most profit, instead of being like those people in the political arena who care about gains and losses, making trouble and calculating every penny, which is a loss of your due identity. Don't forget, they are all just retainers of our royal family." Prince Edward was about to explain, but the Queen looked at Princess Louise. He frowned, then said helplessly, "Louise, what changes have taken place in Europe recently?" Starting from 1864, Princess Alice worked as the Queen's unofficial secretary for 2 years. Due to the opposition of the government cabinet, the princess could only work as an unofficial secretary for 2 years at most. So Helena was preparing to marry Prince George, and the job fell to Princess Louise, who was behind. The 17-year-old Princess Louise began to learn politics from the Queen. Unexpectedly, even the Queen had to admit that she was very talented. Politics was indeed her specialty. The Queen even asked her questions from time to time about many things. Compared with the two predecessors, Princess Victoria and Princess Alice, who basically answered according to the Queen's thoughts, Louise was unique and expressed her own unique insights. It made the Queen expand her thinking. Therefore, the Queen was somewhat surprised and pleasantly surprised, but it was her talent that made the Queen wary. She was afraid that she would be too keen on politics in the future, which would ruin the mission that women should have. Princess Louise smiled, and her beautiful appearance immediately infected everyone at the table. She said, "The Kingdom of Sweden is vigorously developing its economy. However, perhaps because there is only one princess, Karl XV seems to have already decided on the successor, Prince Oscar, and has slowly transferred some political power to him. In terms of the management of Norway, it seems that our intelligence shows that Karl XV is obviously pushing Prince Oscar to become the status that the Swedish crown prince should have in the past, the Vice King of Norway. However, some people in the Swedish parliament have different opinions on this, which makes the bill a bit anticlimactic and loses a lot of Karl XV's prestige. The Queen, I know Prince Oscar. He is the third son of the former Swedish King Oscar I. He has some talents, but Karl XV is in front, and he is the eldest son. Originally, the throne would not fall to him, but as Karl XV's Princess Louisa has been engaged to Crown Prince Frederick of Denmark, it is destined that the throne of Sweden has fallen on his head. This is a pleasant surprise. Therefore, it is appropriate for him to be the Vice King of Norway." Crown Prince Edward frowned and asked, "Why does the Swedish parliament still oppose it?" He envied his sisters a little. They were able to become secretaries of their mother, Queen Victoria, so they were more familiar with the Queen's style of handling political affairs than he was. If it weren't for Princess Alice, who was closest to him, he would definitely be confused every time he discussed privately, and he would make more jokes. Princess Louise didn't wait for the Queen to interrupt, and explained in a serious manner, because the Swedish capitalists are trying to launch an offensive slogan against the Swedish political arena. They want to make more voices representing their interests, including in the parliament, and this time the Vice King is just a trick. The real purpose is to ask for power from Karl XV. They need to check the power of the royal power. In this way, they can better safeguard their interests. Edward couldn't help asking, who is so bold that he dares to oppress a king like this? Aren't you afraid that Karl XV will punish him with a rage? Others looked at Princess Louise in confusion, but this did not include Queen Victoria. Princess Louise shook her head. King Karl XV was also helpless because capitalists have occupied an important position in the current Swedish economy. The two factions of economic influence on politics, formed by the Wallenberg and Nobel families, have begun to slowly form the Swedish political ecology. Therefore, King Karl XV began to be cautious. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197: The Threat from the Hanoverian Dynasty. The Wallenberg family is now slowly using its own Stockholm Bank, Sweden's largest and oldest private bank, to make predatory corporate acquisitions in Sweden. More than a quarter of Swedish companies are now clients of this bank and also shareholdings of the bank. The Wallenberg family uses this holding of shares in the company to provide low-cost financing to the company, making it impossible for the company to resist the temptation and thus fall into the trap set up by Wallenberg. What is Wallenberg's purpose in doing this? Prince Alfred couldn't help asking. Princess Louise had a better relationship with him than many of his brothers and sisters. She smiled sweetly at him and said in amazement, "I think Wallenberg is playing the long game to catch a big fish." In the Queen's quiet eyes, Louise said shockingly, "As long as Sweden encounters any economic crisis, or its own poor management leads to a crisis in the payment of goods, then the Wallenberg family can take the opportunity to annex the other party and complete the goal of swallowing them up." The Wallenberg family's practices were dissected bit by bit as Princess Louise explained them. At this dinner table, it was the first time that her relatives realized that Princess Louise's confident conversation had reached an astonishing level of understanding of Sweden, so thorough. Queen Victoria was even saddened. If Crown Prince Edward had her talent, she would be much more relieved. Thinking of her husband Leopold, she felt even more regretful. The Netherlands is becoming more and more powerful in Europe now. Mother, if the status of Britain on the issue of the Netherlands is not reflected in our own interests, the people's trust in the British royal family will be reduced, which will be a huge loss for the support of the royal family. Therefore, I suggest that Britain can be tougher on the Netherlands, so that they can understand that although the status of the Netherlands has risen and developed rapidly, the Netherlands is still the Netherlands, and Britain's maritime hegemony is still the empire on the sea that the sun never sets. As time passed, Princess Louise began to talk about European countries one by one, and finally talked about the Netherlands. She suggested, Britain must be in a strong position recognized by the Netherlands, which will be beneficial for our country to gain more benefits in the negotiations. Upon hearing this, Crown Prince Edward immediately agreed. He is also a great Britishist, so he is willing to do anything to increase Britain's prestige. Just like he could later oppose his sister Princess Victoria to become the Queen and the Queen Mother of the German Empire, and even before World War I, he did not hesitate or show any mercy to his nephew, Emperor Wilhelm I of Germany. Alice, how about the Kingdom of Hanover? That's my hometown, and George V is my oldest cousin and your father's cousin. I plan to let you marry there and become the Crown Princess of the Hanoverian royal family. What do you think? Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but look at her. Queen Victoria wants Alice to marry in Hanover? Princess Alice suddenly felt the silence around her. She thought of the Dutch figure in her mind, sighed inwardly, and finally gritted her teeth and said decisively, "It's all up to Mother." Queen Victoria looked at her seriously, sighed, and was about to speak. Crown Prince Edward, Mother, Alice. Seeing the Queen staring at him with dissatisfaction, he couldn't help but shut his mouth. Queen Victoria, in that case, let's do it this way. She stood up, turned around and said to Princess Alice, "Some things should be cut off, don't linger." After she left, everyone at the dinner table was silent. Prince Edward, Alice, Edward, I know you want to help me, but Mother's choice is not bad. After saying that, she stood up, showed an apologetic expression to the others, and then quickly left. Princess Louise stood up at this time, came to Prince Edward, and said, "I think it's good too, at least that way, I can be closer to William IV. Then, ignoring Prince Edward's dissatisfaction, she left with a smile. Prince Edward looked at Prince Alfred next to him and said, "Did you see Alice's sadness? The latter rolled his eyes and said, "Anyone who is not blind knows it." Princess Beatrice, "Yes, I know it all." Edward, "Little kid, you are only 8 years old, do you know what to write?" Then Edward sighed, "The Kingdom of Hanover? Maybe." Just like Louise said, Alice can be there to soothe her sadness. The remaining few people were silent after hearing this. February 1st, 1865. The British royal family announced that Princess Alice, the fourth child and second daughter of Queen Victoria, will marry the royal family of the Kingdom of Hanover. She will be engaged to Crown Prince Ernst, the eldest son of King George V of the Kingdom of Hanover, on March 20, 1865, and will marry on June 10 of the same year. After a burst of differences, the European royal family followed in silence. The Queen of England has many children, and her marriage policy represents extraordinary significance to Britain every time. Just like this marriage to the Kingdom of Hanover. The Kingdom of Hanover was originally Queen Victoria's family. Her father is Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, the Kingdom of Hanover, and the fourth Prince of George III of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Hanover. Queen Victoria's father's elder brothers George IV and William IV both succeeded to the throne of the two countries, but they both died early and had no offspring. So William IV, the King of Britain and Hanover, wanted to pass the position to Queen Victoria. However, some people in Hanover did not want Hanover to continue to be ruled by Britain, so they activated the Salic succession law, prohibiting women from inheriting the throne. In the end, Queen Victoria only inherited the British throne, and her fifth uncle Ernst August I, then Duke Albert, inherited the throne in 1837. This is a close relationship. Many people even speculated that this was a response to the British royal family's desire to expand its presence on the European continent in response to the fact that Britain had been united by Prussia, France and the Netherlands in recent years to squeeze out British influence. The current King George V of the Hanoverian royal family is Queen Victoria's cousin, and the age difference between the two is less than a month. Although there are doubts about the marriage of the eldest sister of Britain, Hanover itself can become the fourth largest country in the German Confederation after the Austrian Empire, the Kingdom of Prussia, and the Kingdom of Bavaria because of the support of Britain behind it. It is also ahead of the Kingdom of Saxony, and the geographical location of the Kingdom of Hanover is destined to become a thorn in the eyes of various countries. William IV was also stunned when he heard the news. He thought of Princess Alice, who showed him a brave expression of love at the matchmaking meeting he held, and Princess Louise who was hiding very deeply. Of course, now his brother-in-law, Princess Helena, the wife of Prince George of Denmark, also flashed through his mind. The Kingdom of Hanover was obviously frustrated in the Schleswig War this time, so it was willing to accept Britain's overtures, but also on guard. William IV sneered and thought to himself, however, Prussia, which is in urgent need of an outlet to the sea, will Bismarck and others let Hanover get away with it? When was the Kingdom of Hanover taken over by Prussia? Do you remember? Chapter 198, Undercurrents in the German Confederation. Prussian Prime Minister Bismarck, since 1714, George, the Elector of Hanover, has ruled Britain and concurrently served as the King of England. From then on, Hanover, Great Britain and Ireland could form a personal union. However, in 1803, Hanover, like the Netherlands, was occupied by France under the command of Napoleon I. It was not until the fall of Napoleon in 1814 that Hanover was upgraded to a kingdom with the consent of major powers. At the Vienna Conference, it was decided to give the King of England a say in the affairs of the German Confederation. At that time, it was decided to upgrade the electorate of Hanover to the Kingdom of Hanover and form a princess union with Britain. But this personal union soon collapsed. At that time, in 1837, our Kingdom of the Netherlands, because of the rise of Viscount Palmerston, intervened in the rule of Belgium and successfully split the Netherlands. Starting in 1830 and until 1838 when the Netherlands recognized the independence of Belgium, the German Confederation regions were on high alert against Britain. Therefore, after the death of King William IV of England, the British throne was passed to the heir of Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, who was a close relative. When she inherited the British throne, the German Confederation initiated the implementation of the Salisbury Law on the European continent, prohibiting women from inheriting the throne. The throne of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Ireland and Hanover, ruled by Queen Victoria's third uncle, William IV, was eventually divided and passed to his fifth uncle, the Duke of Cumberland. He looked at Moltke and William I and said gloomily, "Britain has too much say in Germany." Queen Victoria is not like William IV. Although the Duchy of Luxembourg is also within the German Confederation, the Netherlands rarely participates in the affairs of the German Confederation. Britain is just the opposite. Hanover has become the expression of Britain's will. It's just like the war between Schleswig and Holstein against Denmark that we initiated this time. Hanover and Saxony actually took the lead in front of us. If they hadn't encountered the blow from Denmark, they would even be competing with us for domination now. Therefore, Bismarck said to William I, Your Majesty, Hanover must be pulled out, which can make the road for all Prussian rise smoother. Isn't this too bad? Crown Prince Frederick asked without waiting for William I to express his opinion, will Britain send troops to support Hanover? If it really sends troops, then for Prussia, it will be attacked from both sides. The Prime Minister should know that Austria will not miss the opportunity to join forces with Britain to deal with us, and Prussia's attack on Hanover is an excuse for them. Is the Crown Prince worried that Austria will join forces? Bismarck asked. Crown Prince Frederick, yes, we have to be on guard, right? After getting William I's approval, Bismarck revealed a piece of information to Crown Prince Frederick, which shocked Crown Prince Frederick so much that he jumped up from his seat. Because Prime Minister Bismarck said, Hanover must be taken, that's for sure. As for him becoming an excuse for Austria to unite with Britain, he, the Crown Prince, can rest assured. Seeing that Crown Prince Frederick was puzzled, he continued, because my plan was that Prussia was already thinking about the Austrian Empire going to war first, and then taking the opportunity to directly take Hanover. Do you think Austria still needs this excuse? Want to fight Austria? Seeing that William I, Moltke and others were indifferent, it was obvious that they had known about this plan long ago. Before, there was Schleswig-Holstein in Denmark, and now there is the Austrian Empire and the Kingdom of Hanover. This. Crown Prince Frederick was shocked. He couldn't help but say, since you are ready to fight Austria, then Britain. Okay, Frederick. William I stopped Crown Prince Frederick. He stood up and pointed to the latest version of the map on the wall. He said in a deep voice, look at the map around Prussia. To the north is the Baltic Sea, and to the east is the Polish Duchy ruled by the Russian Empire. To the southeast is the Austrian Empire, and to the south are the Kingdom of Bavaria, the Duchy of Thuringia, the Duchy of Saxony, the Duchy of Hesse, the Duchy of Baden, the Duchy of Bohemia, etc. To the west are the Kingdom of Hanover, the Duchy of Lorraine, the Duchy of Alsace, the Duchy of Mecklenburg, the Duchy of Württemberg, the Duchy of Holstein, and the Duchy of Schleswig in the north. The geographical location of the Kingdom of Hanover is very critical. It is connected to Holstein on the Jutland Peninsula in the north. To the northeast is the Baltic Sea and borders Mecklenburg. The southwest is connected to a Rhine province and separates our homeland from the Rhine province. To the west of Hanover is the northern Netherlands. Of course, Hanover is still our outlet to the Atlantic Ocean. Therefore, Bismarck, Moltke, and I have already planned that our next goal will be to provoke a war with Austria and take the opportunity to capture Hanover, Mecklenburg, and Brandenburg, so as to open up channels to the Rhine province, the Netherlands, and even the Atlantic Ocean. As long as these places are captured, even if the war with Austria ends in the end, it will only maintain the current status quo. After taking Hanover, Brandenburg, and Mecklenburg, Prussia will definitely be completely different from now. Crown Prince Frederick, but Austria's strength is there, will both sides suffer losses at that time, and the British will benefit. Bismarck smiled and said, Your Highness, have you forgotten that the current Austrian Empire is a wounded soldier who has just suffered heavy losses? Crown Prince Frederick was stunned, and then he stared at Prime Minister Bismarck with wide eyes. He looked at William I and Chief of the General Staff Moltke again, swallowed his saliva in disbelief. The Prime Minister's plan is not to take advantage of the fact that Austria has just lost nearly 100,000 people in the Schleswig War, so he wants to take his life now. Bismarck shook his head. The Crown Prince is wrong. Crown Prince Frederick, what's wrong? William I, you are wrong, because we have already calculated Austria's war losses before the start of the Schleswig War. Therefore, rather than taking advantage of his illness to kill him, it is better to say that from the beginning, Austria fell into the trap we designed for him. No way. Crown Prince Frederick reacted and looked at them in even more disbelief. Austria was calculated at that time. Schleswig War. He couldn't help asking. Bismarck, we also calculated it. Frederick realized at this moment that everything that had shocked Europe before was in the hands of the few people in front of him. Suddenly, A link appeared in his mind quickly. The Austrian War in Ethiopia, the expansion in Nigeria, and the Schleswig War. Crown Prince Frederick exclaimed, "I didn't understand before, and thought why Prussia chose to launch an attack there to support Austria's opponents. Now I understand that they wanted to trap Austria's troops there, and then the local soldiers could only suffer heavy losses in Schleswig under our deliberate alliance." Austria also deployed heavy troops outside of Europe, but the mainland was empty. According to Prime Minister Bismarck, this is a good time for Prussia to attack Austria. He asked, "I don't know, what time did your Majesty and the Prime Minister choose?" Bismarck, 1866. Chapter 199 General Grant's Highlight Moment. 1865, the Dutch Queen Mother Anna Pavlovna celebrated her 70th birthday. European countries sent congratulations, and even President Lincoln of North America, who was at war, sent a telegram of celebration. In addition to her nephew, Alexander II of the Russian Empire, who sent congratulations in St. Petersburg, her sister's descendants who married into various European countries either sent representatives or sent congratulatory letters, etc., all participated in the event. Among them were her eldest sister Alexandra Pavlovna who married into the Duchy of Hungary, her second sister Elena Pavlovna who married into the Duchy of Mecklenburg, her third sister Maria Pavlovna who married into the Duchy of Saxony, and her fourth sister Ekaterina Pavlovna who married into the Duchy of Oldenburg for the first time and the Duchy of Württemberg for the second time. The descendants of these sisters are all the heirs of the country's successive Grand Dukes. Therefore, among the descendants of Paul I, with the death of the third sister Maria Pavlovna in 1863, she became the only surviving descendant of Tsar Paul I and also became the link between the royal families of various countries. That is, the only elder of the heirs of these countries, so they are respected by all countries. Of course, in addition to them, the royal families of Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, Ottoman, and even Italy, Portugal, and Spain in the south have sent congratulatory letters. William III, the former King of the Netherlands and now King of the Kingdom of Greece, returned to Amsterdam with Queen Sophie, accompanied by Prince Frederick, the third brother of William IV, who was taken to Greece to become the Crown Prince. Prince Carol, the second son of William III, died young in 1850. It is precisely because of the departure of William III that William IV now inherits the position of Grand Duke of Luxembourg. Together with William IV's current wife Queen Alexandra, a total of 6 people make up the current members of the Dutch royal family. With William IV deliberately holding a grand banquet for his grandmother Anna Pavlovna's 70th birthday in Amsterdam, the Netherlands has another opportunity to promote relations with other countries. With the royal diplomacy displayed by borrowing the relationship with a grandmother, the Netherlands' status in Europe has risen rapidly, and at the same time, European civilians have discovered the intricate relationship between the Netherlands and other countries for the first time. The bloodline of the royal family is always the most concerned by the people of all countries. William IV is now also facing the concerns of the Dutch people. After all, there are many royal family members in European countries who have no descendants. Not to mention the distant past, William I of Prussia had 2 brothers who had no descendants, so he had the opportunity to succeed to the throne. And Queen Victoria's great-uncle George IV and second-uncle William IV, the 2 kings of the United Kingdom of Britain, Ireland and Hanover, also had no descendants, which gave her the opportunity to inherit the British throne. Therefore, William IV's bloodline really worried the Dutch. However, with the emergence of a piece of news on February 20, 1865, it really made the people feel relieved. Because, more than a year after William IV got married, the royal family finally received good news from Queen Alexandra: she was pregnant. Immediately, this information became the headlines of newspapers in the Netherlands, the main topic of discussion among civilians, and even in the Far East in Africa, this information was the most popular topic of daily life chat. William IV was naturally very happy. This is his bloodline that is about to come into this world, and there has never been a moment like now that makes him feel that he is now integrated into this world. Even when he married Alexandra, who was originally the British Crown Prince Edward and the future Queen of King Edward, and even the bridal chamber, he was not as close to this world as this moment. No wonder all time travelers only find that they belong to this world when they become fathers, William IV sighed. But because of this, he has more hope for the future of the Netherlands. This is what a struggling father should do, because William IV, like other fathers, always wants to leave the best for his children, and now he wants to build a strong and secure kingdom of the Netherlands for his future children in this world of constant war. Perhaps influenced by the news that his child was about to arrive, William IV seemed to be no longer conservative in his style of doing things, and even began to become radical in his urgency. On February 25, 1865, in the Dutch Parliament attended by William IV, when Prime Minister Thorbecke said in a parliamentary question-and-answer session that the number of immigrants in the 2 years before 1864 exceeded 2.4 million, William IV interrupted and directly stated that in 1865, 2 million of the 6.5 million people in the Netherlands would immigrate to the Far East, making the native Dutch population there almost the same as the native population for the first time. As the news came out, the Dutch government began planning a new round of immigration. In diplomacy, William IV also began to frequently invite royal families from European countries to the Netherlands to carry out royal diplomatic strategies, took the initiative to propose the Netherlands' friendly attitude towards various countries, increased the Netherlands' reputation among European royal families, and with the royal family members of these countries' trips to the Netherlands, the national pride of the Netherlands reached its highest level. During this period, wars in North America continued. Large and small battles occurred frequently on the main battlefield in the East. On February 15, 1865, the entire Mississippi River basin in the middle of the country was controlled by General Grant, a rapidly rising star general in the Northern military. He divided the South into two parts, East and West, and changed the entire strategic pattern between the North and the South. On February 25, 1865, Grant was appointed as the Commander-in-Chief of the Northern American Federal Army by President Lincoln due to his outstanding military exploits. But in order to balance him, Lincoln promoted William Sherman as Deputy Commander-in-Chief at the same time with Secretary of State Seward. The military of the American Federal Republic was suddenly divided into two major factions, with Elihu B. Washburn and others supporting Commander-in-Chief Grant and Seward and others supporting Deputy Commander-in-Chief General William Sherman. As an excellent leader who is good at grasping the overall situation of the war, he decided to work with General William Sherman to take the overall situation into consideration and jointly formulate a coordinated plan for East-West operations to promote the progress of the war. On March 1, the two divided their troops into two groups, each leading 150,000 troops to launch an attack, among which General Grant's main target was Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the South. General William Sherman was responsible for attacking Atlanta, Georgia from Chattanooga, Tennessee. In order to clear the enemy in front of him at any cost, Grant first attacked into the wilderness south of the Rappahannock River and confronted Robert Lee, the Commander-in-Chief of the Confederacy, for 2 days and 2 nights. Lee made full use of the familiar terrain and launched a fierce attack on Grant there, making it impossible for Grant to launch a favorable counterattack. After 2 days of the war, Grant's troops suffered heavy losses, with more than 19,000 casualties. Seward's people launched a public opinion war against Grant in Washington. It was not easy to maintain Walburn and others, but Lincoln and the Congress did not dismiss Grant for replacement. It seems that the situation is changing. At the same time, Sherman's progress in western Tennessee was not smooth. On March 3, the troops led by him launched an attack on Kennesaw Mountain, but they encountered a fierce counterattack and suffered heavy casualties. What was even worse was that General Jubal Early of the South suddenly led his troops across the Potomac River from the San Ando Canyon and marched to a place only 5 kilometers away from Washington before turning around. This scared Grant and Sherman. Even Seward and Walburn were frightened by Lincoln. Especially the two people in front. If the capital of the North was really taken down by the South, it would be a big loss, and there would be no talk of fighting for power. So this time, both of them chose to cooperate. And Grant and Sherman on the front line also cooperated more closely. Then Grant began to change his battle strategy and turned to attack Robert Lee's southeast flank. But Robert Lee is worthy of being the strongest military general in the history of the United States. He figured out Grant's movements, so he immediately turned to the southeast and quickly established well-positioned fortifications near the Spotsylvania courthouse. Grant attacked here for 5 days and 5 nights, but not only failed to shake the solid defense line of the South, but also lost more than 20,000 troops. But he did not retreat. At the same time, he ordered Sherman in the east to destroy the South at all costs and regardless of the consequences. In the order, he was responsible for dragging Robert Lee. Sherman not only destroyed the opponent's army, but also destroyed the opponent's economic foundation and the will of the people to fight. To this end, Grant sent 30,000 troops to support the opponent to achieve this goal. Therefore, after Sherman entered Atlanta, when Tennessee in the South counterattacked, he did not pursue, but decided to lead from Atlanta to the seaside and cross to Georgia. This war not only occupied the opponent's territory, but also almost destroyed the material resources of the South, and completely weakened the South's war potential in the West. 460 kilometers under the iron hoof of Sherman's army, plantations, villages, towns, and even hundreds of miles of railways, destroying all obstacles along the way, as long as necessary, killing one person to seize every inch of land, according to his later words, ruthlessly destroying everything we see. At the same time, Grant in the East also brought a turning point. With the changes in the West, Robert Lee's army was exhausted in the frozen street fighting, but Grant was because Lincoln gave unconditional support to his subordinates who he promoted, so he went against all odds and provided Grant with sufficient soldiers and weapons and equipment. He even increased the purchase of weapons from the Netherlands and Prussia because the country began to fall behind. With support, Grant cut off the supply line between the Confederate Army and Richmond by lengthening the front line, and besieged Robert Lee's army in Atlanta. Therefore, this confrontation war stopped on April 10, 1865, a month later, and it was settled as Robert suffered heavy losses and retreated south with 1/3 of the army. And Grant also completely established his position as the first person in the Northern military after this war. The momentum was unparalleled in North America. Chapter 200, Crimea Dispute resurfaces. 1865, a piece of news published in the European Times, the largest newspaper in Europe, suddenly filled Europe with a strange silence. The protagonist that appeared in front of Europeans this time was no longer the division caused by the United States and North America, and the internal war in the United States led by President Lincoln of the Northern Union and President Davis of the Southern Confederacy. It was not that the German Confederation had just defeated Denmark and won, but the Kingdom of Prussia and the Austrian Empire, which almost fought each other because of the uneven distribution of spoils. It turned out that on this day, the Crimean Tsarist Empire and the Ottoman Empire in the East had a dispute again, and the two countries began to have intermittent small disputes on the Black Sea coast. According to statistics from the European Times, from 1860 to the present 1865, the two countries had more than 100 disputes of varying sizes due to Crimea, almost one a month, and the total number of casualties in both countries exceeded 10,000. The emergence of this news made those who had experienced the Crimean War from 1853 to 1856 tremble in their hearts. Although only 10 years have passed, people still can't forget the heavy casualties in that war, which caused so many families to be separated, and so many families became single-parent families after losing the pillars of the family. For this reason, anti-Crimean War marches appeared on the streets of European countries that participated in the war. In particular, those affected single-parent families called on the government to stop it from happening again. There was a moment of silence on the streets of London for the more than 200,000 British soldiers who died there. Paris took the lead in asking Napoleon III to reconcile the contradictions between the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire for the 300,000 soldiers lost by the French Empire in this war. Some extreme people even asked Napoleon III to apologize for the deaths of 300,000 people. This caused the Napoleon III incident in Paris and even all over the country. This made Europe look sideways. The recent war between Alexander II, Denmark and the German Confederation in Schleswig made him realize that Britain seemed to be unable to check and balance other countries on the European continent. Otherwise, Prussia and Austria would not have dared to occupy Schleswig-Holstein when British warships were in the Baltic Sea. He sneered, "It's all the fault of William IV. If he hadn't repeatedly induced countries to bypass Britain's influence in Africa and obtain a large number of colonies on the issue of Africa, the countries that tasted the sweetness would have been unable to control themselves." Even Britain's intervention was thought by all countries that Britain wanted to take it all for itself. William IV, this little guy, hid deep enough. Alexander II naturally had some complicated feelings about the Crimean War that ended in 1856, because it was because of this war that Nicholas I died and the Russian Empire even fell into decline. And because of this, he inherited the throne of the Russian Empire. Faced with a Russian Empire that was in ruins, he worked hard to govern it. In just 10 years, he finally brought the Russian Empire out of the quagmire of the war. Even in education, He kept up with the pace of advanced countries such as Britain and France. This led to the emergence of a large number of advanced educational scholars in the country, which can be called the most important decade in the history of literature and science in the foundation of the Russian Empire. Many people in Europe are worried about war now, but they are just ordinary people in vested interests. But for ambitious people, this is an opportunity. Alexander II is such a person. 10 years of hard work is to avenge the previous shame. Britain's status has declined, France is ambitious, and Prussia has risen rapidly in the German Confederation with the implicit support of the Russian Empire, forming a confrontation with Austria. Alexander II will never forget that his father Nicholas I, before his death, kept talking about the most trusted ally of the Russian Empire, Austrian Joseph I, who actually stationed troops on the border between Austria and the Russian Empire, causing the Russian Empire to send heavy troops to the border between the two countries, reducing the number of troops in the Crimean War in the south of Nicholas I, and finally failed and died in depression. Now the more Austria is suppressed by Prussia, the more comfortable Alexander II is. Alexander II also learned from Western Europe to form his own Privy Council meeting and convene several giants to hold meetings at the same time, which is also a common thing. Now, he summoned several people, including Count Gorchakov, Grand Duke Konstantin Nikolaevich, and Count Milyutin. Gorchakov was promoted to the new Prime Minister of the Russian Empire at the beginning of this year because he was trusted by Alexander II, and he also continued to serve as the Foreign Minister of the Russian Empire. Grand Duke Konstantin Nikolaevich was the second son of Nicholas I and the younger brother of Alexander II. He served as the Minister of the Navy and Governor-General of the Kingdom of Poland in 1864, and as the Speaker of the State Council of the Russian Empire, actually the Privy Council, in early 1865. As for Milyutin, he was a famous general of the Russian Empire, and he was now the Minister of the Army of the Russian Empire. It can be said that these three people are the most important left and right arms of Alexander II, and Gorchakov is in charge of the cabinet government. The latter two are in charge of the military power of the Navy and the Army for Alexander II respectively. Minister of the Army Milyutin's eyes shot out a sharp light, and he said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, as the Ottoman Empire relied on the Paris Peace Treaty to take more precautions in the management of Bessarabia on the northwest coast of the Black Sea, it made it difficult for us to infiltrate there. I think we can't let them go on like this. They are also counter-infiltration, and even centralized management of our Slavs. This pig farming is no different. Perhaps, this is an excuse for us to intervene in their affairs." Hearing the words of the Paris Peace Treaty, everyone present looked happy. For all the Tsarist Russians, this peace treaty is a symbol of shame, because it made Tsarist Russia a laughingstock in Europe. Since this peace treaty, Tsarist Russia recognized the territorial integrity of the Ottoman Empire, and the Tsarist Russian Empire ceded part of the occupied territory of the Crimean Peninsula. However, the Ottoman Empire has always been dissatisfied with this result. In order to obtain the Crimean Peninsula, the Tsarist Russian Empire also needs to give the northern part of Bessarabia at the mouth of the Danube to the small country of Moldavia. The southern part is ceded to the Ottoman Empire. The Caucasus and the Caucasus were also required to be returned to the Ottoman Empire and give up the right to protect the Orthodox Church in the Ottoman Empire, which was equivalent to making the Tsarist Russia lose the right to interfere in the affairs of the Ottoman Empire. The suzerainty of Serbia, Wallachia and Moldavia, which the Tsarist Russia had always been unwilling to accept, also required the Tsarist Russia to recognize that it belonged to the Ottoman Empire. The defense rights of the tripartite alliance of Serbia, Wallachia and Moldavia must also be recognized. The Danube River was opened, and the Tsarist Russia was not allowed to interfere with the navigation of ships. If it was the territory there that made them uncomfortable, what disgusted everyone the most was that the peace treaty also prohibited the Tsarist Russian Empire from having fleets and naval bases in the Black Sea, and prohibited the Tsarist Russian Empire from setting up defenses on the Alan Islands in the Baltic Sea. My God, after the failure of the Crimean War, these other European powers actually reached out to the Baltic Sea. This is obviously taking advantage of the issue. After a long time, Alexander II gritted his teeth and said, "Send troops to Bessarabia." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.